SpaceX TV1.
Good morning, everyone. This is Bloomberg Surveillance from our world headquarters in New York. We welcome you in the middle of an historic moment for American engineering and American aerospace science. It is a spacewalk, and for anyone of a certain vintage, without question, it harkens back to a moment in 1965 when Ed White did the unthinkable. There's no other way to put it. There's no other parallel. We've seen the first of two spacewalks, we hope, going for 15 minutes here. Mr. Isaacman is going back into the chamber right now. Some of you on YouTube will see that. On radio, we'll attempt to describe it. It is an Earth in the distance as they are in orbit with the dark and the light of the Earth, the horizon, if you will, cut off right in front of Mr. Isaacman with his first important spacewalk, a real leap forward. And Paul, what's important here is the combination of events of this Polaris Dawn event, where we saw them in an elliptical orbit, I believe yesterday, going out farther than any orbital science since the Apollo missions. Just beginning to reach out farther towards goals and hopes of the moon and of Mars. For those of you on YouTube, we welcome you. And I get the imagery here of the capsule of Polaris Dawn, the four astronauts.
Back inside. We heard him going through what's called the test matrix. It's basically just a bunch of maneuvers using different hands, using the foot.
So I think that was the first effort. Sarah Gillis is scheduled to go here.
Calling out numbers right now, though, we're doing
within another set, and we'll see how that goes. Let us welcome you to the show. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene, Michael Barnes, sabbatical, Lisa Mateo here with John Tucker. Thank you across this nation for your many comments on our September 11th coverage of yesterday. Paul and I greatly appreciate that. Paul Sweeney, we have markets going. Our goal is to get to Holger Schmieding here in 2 minutes. Paul, I think we should go to John Davies of the engineering degree in London. I mean, John is the one with some real understanding here. John Davies, for me, this harkens back to Gemini in 1965, but the technology today, John Davies, is so different.
Well, it isn't. I mean, the microelectronics are vastly superior, but most of the sort of core rocketry is the same basic technology, but with much better manufacturing fidelity, and mass production is going to be the really cool thing. Mr. Musk is talking about thousands of spacesuits and pushing on towards the moon and then towards Mars at pace.
John, talk to us about just commercial space. Talk to us about it as a business here, because we're seeing just some extraordinary video coming from high above Earth here. Talk to us about commercial space.
The big thing is communications. Historically, most of the money came from video and a little bit from data and voice. It's flipping a little more over time to be more and more data. And there's also various other fun things, like you can do imaging. So Planet Labs is a fun company that does imaging of almost everywhere on Earth, sometimes many times every day. This is obviously in a whole new world, literally, the SpaceX orbital aspects. Putting people into space is not going to be massively profitable unless they're charging. We don't know how much they're charging these guys, but it's all to advance their technology rather than to make money on this particular launch.
Joining us as well, Kate Duffy, part of our aerospace coverage. That team centered out of Texas, of course, and London. Kate Duffy, you've been following this story. Help our listeners in America catching up on Polaris Dawn. How long will this mission last?
Good morning. Yes, so it's expected to last in total 2 hours. So we're just over the hour mark now, and we're about to see Sarah Gillis perform her spacewalk. We've just seen Jared Isaacman do that as well. So she'll have about 15 to 20 minutes performing this particular spacewalk. And then after that, again, like Jared did, return to her seat and have a repressurization of the capsule.
Kate, the imagery that America has of this is Gemini and Ed White with a rocket in his right hand and an umbilical cord out into space. When they do a spacewalk here, do they have the same sense of umbilical cord And do they have any propulsion to move them around as they go out of the capsule?
Yes, I mean, these new spacesuits are designed for more mobility than the traditional spacesuits that we've seen in the past. So they will be performing these mobility tests when they're doing the spacewalk. And as we've seen, Jared was doing a few movements there just to test out, how far they can go with these new spacesuits. But there's, lots of other capabilities with them. They've got thermal materials to make sure that the crew are the right temperature. They've also got this heads-up display inside so they can see the pressure, your oxygen levels really clearly, and it's not obstructing their view. And, they've also got a camera there. So all of these things were tested before they did the spacewalk. That's what was involved in the first sort of 30 minutes of the spacewalk process. So, yes.
Yeah, I think we should describe this for radio, Paul, as well. I mean, it's a little hard to see on radio. But, Paul, for me, after seeing an Apollo or a Gemini or the tragedy of Ed White in that spacewalk dying a few years later with Gus Grissom and Roger Chaffee, this SpaceX capsule I think it looks like a Bentley. I'll leave it up to you, but it may look like some power boat. I mean, the difference in engineering from nuts and bolts of the Apollo program to now is extraordinary. It looks like the inside
of a Tesla, very comfortable. And
exactly.
Extraordinary video, Tom, of these astronauts, just kind of sticking their heads out, getting halfway out of the capsule, and they're literally in the depths of the black of space. I can't imagine what they're feeling right now, but these are civilians. This is a commercial spacecraft and a commercial flight. John Davies, this is SpaceX, John. What are really the goals of SpaceX over the next 2, 3, 4 years?
Well, the big thing we're going to see soon is the new rocket, so the Starship, and the heavy booster, which they're hoping to launch another test flight, probably going to be in November. I think they've run into regulatory delays. That is essential to their forward plans, as I said earlier, to get towards the moon and then to Mars, and also to keep their Starlink network growing, which is to give data access to people on the ground. And that's going to be a super exciting launch, because the plan is they're going to try and catch it, the booster, on its way back to Earth, rather than abandoning it to the sea, just as you do with Falcon 9 at the moment, which is their current rocket, which launched the people we see before us now. They land on a booster, and the booster on the sea or at land. This one's going to get caught by chopsticks. It's very cool.
We welcome all of you across the nation on Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, on YouTube. Please subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast for further aerospace coverage. We're going to continue here. Sarah Gillis, now at the lip of Polaris Dawn. And again, as Paul mentioned, for those of you on radio, it's a complete black backdrop. Just think of a black curtain, where earlier with Mr. Isaacman out first, we did see the Earth in the background, the luminescence of the Earth as well. Kate Duffy, help us here with a goal here of SpaceX. Our imagery is Matt Damon is on Mars. It's a little more sophisticated than that, isn't it, Kate?
Possibly, yes. I mean, that is the idea. SpaceX, they do want to get to Mars. They want to colonize it, eventually want to get a base on the moon, and then to Mars. And the point of these spacesuits, for example, is to scale them up so that eventually they can be used for missions such as this. And, Starlink as well, that's internet in space, which they have been testing actually during the mission. I think they phoned their families, it said earlier on X, through Starlink internet. And, launching Starship also is the goal of this mission, to get to Mars eventually. So all of these, missions that they're doing have a goal, have a target. And this one, although it doesn't have a particular business or commercial angle specifically, it is part of the portfolio that SpaceX is now growing as a business. So it's really interesting to see, and even more interesting that this is a commercial company that's able to do this, a first private company.
It's just amazing. We're hearing in the background some audio of Sarah Gillis, SpaceX engineer, as she is out in space. Kate, I guess my question is, I think Lisa Mateo, Tom Keene, and I, we grew up with NASA were the folks that got you into space. NASA were the folks that put you on the moon. Now it's Jeff Bezos, it's Elon Musk, it's Sir Richard Branson. Talk to us about just the commercialization of space. How broad can this be in the years to come?
It's going to take a while, but I think, you know, there is a possibility in the distant future that this could genuinely be a really good business opportunity. At the moment, it's extremely costly. You know, Jared Isaacman, for example, who's one of the crew members, is a billionaire, and he's part-funded this mission. He also helped with the Inspiration 4 mission. So it takes a lot of money to get to where they want to be and to achieve these sort of commercial goals. And it will take a lot of experiments as well, and a lot of failures, as we've seen with space and rocket launches recently. But SpaceX that's their goal, and that's what they want to achieve.
We're having some camera connection problems here for those of you on YouTube.
Space, I mean.
Worldwide. Yeah, you know.
We got camera connection to the Zoom from downstairs.
Yeah, exactly right. The voice you hear, Sarah Gillis, the second person to move into space today, maybe not with the drama that we saw. Are you ready for this? 59 years ago.
Really?
Was Ed White and Gemini.
Wow.
And the entire world stopped for that. It was extraordinary to see at the time. I believe I just heard underneath 1 minute. Let's listen right now to the back and forth on Polaris Dawn.
And you could see the Earth dark, and we flew into like an orbital.
All right, and test matrix to kind of combine them, so we'll call that complete. Seat pressure 5.27, 38% humidity, 33.7 Celsius.
SpaceX copies, matrix complete, and 100 out.
With us, Kate Duffy and John Davies, part of our aerospace team. It's been a build-out for Bloomberg here, well, for many years, but really with a new momentum in the last 24 months as commercial space technology ramps up. John Davies, let's talk about the rockets. You mentioned earlier there's going to be a big rocket, and of course the technology is far beyond Saturn V. Do we have a rocket right now to propel us to Mars?
Well, the idea is that the Starship will be able, with the Super Heavy booster, will be able to do that in time with a slightly larger version than the one they're currently testing. So, but it's very modular technology. So if they start getting the one that they plan to launch in November to work, then very much the roadmap is clear towards getting to Mars.
It's extraordinary. Can you put a date on that, Kate? Jump in here. Can you guys put a date on when we're going to do Matt Damon? I think for America, I think, I'll be honest, you guys in London are more on this than we are. When are we going to Mars, Kate Duffy?
I think that's a really good question. I think the most recent date that Elon Musk's given is 2026, is when the next Earth to Mars transfer window opens. But who knows? I mean, this is really sort of volatile technology. It's new. It's always being tested. There are successes and also failures. And Starship, we're just waiting for that to progress. And it depends on that, really.
Okay, right now we're having, not at the closing of the hatch, but always important to see, and we'll have some camera issues out in space, but SpaceX reporting to us that this will end here in a moment with Sarah Gillis returning to the capsule after Mr. Isaacman, and there'll be a closing of the capsule door to what appears to be a successful 2 spacewalks. Kate Duffy, you first. Final thoughts here as we end this broadcast across a morning in America. But Kate Duffy, your thoughts on what's next for Elon Musk and SpaceX?
Well, considering this was what seems to be a spacewalk that has gone extremely well, potentially there could be another one down the line. There'll be probably more testing of these spacesuits, more scaling up of them, and yeah, I mean, who knows with SpaceX? They've always got something up their sleeve. But hopefully, so another Starship launch in the works, more satellite launches, obviously, more Starlink satellites in space, and just continuing to expand their space empire.
Very good, Kate Duffy. Thank you. John Davies, I mean, are there other companies out there that Tom Keene, Lisa Mateo, and I, that we should be paying attention to that are thinking about commercial space? Is it just these American companies, or are there others out there?
Really, the excitement's all been around launch, and the only other big one is going to be the Blue Origin company, which I'm sure you're fully familiar with, Mr. The Bezos company. Aside from that, there's loads of people making small satellites, but each of them is kind of marginal in terms of possible revenues, but for commercial space exploration at scale, SpaceX is it. If you look at the share of launch it has, it's almost all of it.
John Davies, thank you so much. Kate Duffy, thank you so much. And thank you to Nathan Hager and Karen Moscow for carrying us through this broadcast on Bloomberg Daybreak this morning. Paul, your thoughts here? I mean, I don't think it's a small matter that the nation can pick itself up from September 11th, 23 years ago, and still lead with, your question, I believe it was to John, it was dead on, can others do this? And the proof is in the pudding. No, they can't.
It's just, again, there's a great connection there to 9/11. I was at Yankee Stadium last night, and we certainly remember 9/11 at Yankee Stadium last night. And then to think of these American companies just doing extraordinarily amazing technological feats here. And again, you have just, these are not NASA astronauts. These are civilians going into space and walking into space. It just, again, it kind of makes you feel very nostalgic, or very patriotic about the science and the technology prowess of the U.S.
Well, we'll have to see. An historic moment again. Walk in space, the hatch open, attached to the capsule, but nevertheless out in the vacuum of space. We thank our team, particularly Kate Duffy, John Davies, for their assistance this morning. Futures are up 6 after the moonshot yesterday. I'd called up Michael Purvis about 2 p.m. yesterday, and I said, Michael, what'd you do? Buy? We'll get to Michael Purvis here in a moment. Right now, with our news in New York City, here's Lisa Mateo.
Good morning. Yeah, from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio. Futures right now, well, they're starting to go on the rise. We have Nasdaq futures, little change, but up 6 points. Dow futures, they're up 0.1%, 61 points. S&P futures up 0.1% or 6 points. This is after underlying U.S. inflation unexpectedly picked up in August, but today we're going to get a look at the producer price index for last month. Bloomberg Economics anticipates another mild reading. We're also going to get initial jobless claims for last week. Let's head over to the bond market. We have the 2-year yield at 3.66%, up 2 basis points. The 10-year yield 3.67%, and that's up 1 basis point. Deal-making news: General Mills agreed to sell its North American yogurt business for $2.1 billion to 2 French dairy companies. General Mills shares down about 0.2%. 7&I shares higher, up 4% in Japan. Couche-Tard was set to discuss increasing its offer price. We have Couche-Tard down about 0.2%. And Nippon Steel making its last effort, drumming up support for its takeover of U.S. Steel as its executive vice president traveled to Washington for meetings yesterday. We have Nippon Steel up more than 1% in Japan, U.S. Steel up more than 1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate that. We should mention Holger Schmieding of Berenberg Bank. We were unable to get to him in our first block of 7 o'clock hour because of SpaceX festivities, but we will get
him back absolutely
on again soon. This is a day of the ECB cutting interest rates. We looked at the markets yesterday. We looked at the ballet of central bankers, and somebody said, get Purvis, which is what we've done. Michael Purvis from Tallback joins us right now. We were all jealous of you. You had the best summer of any of us. You had the beard going. You had the place, I assume, up north where the black flies have landing lights. Did you survive the summer? We all want to know. All of us working in it. Mateo was swearing at you sometime the second week of August.
I survived New Hampshire's black flies, and the beard is off.
The beard is
Summer's over.
Is the gloom off? The thing yesterday, I said this to Paul. Cam Dawson and separately Gina Martin Adams reaffirmed double-digit earnings growth.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's not in the zeitgeist right now.
Right. I think that's a really important statement, that the earnings trajectory in certain facets of the equity market is not quite as exciting as we might have seen earlier this year or last year. But the overall earnings trajectory is really pretty strong for both big tech and for the everything else part of the market. And I would argue, Tom, that this equity rally we're dealing with right now is a bull rally, but it's a bull rally really driven by earnings growth and not really about what the Fed is doing and whether PEs should expand or contract. PEs move around, of course, a little bit, but if you actually look at the PE ranges for the S&P 500 or other indices, they've been remarkably stable here. They move around, but they're really the range by which they move around is very stable. We're dealing with an earnings-driven rally here, and if you're bullish on earnings, then you really kind of need to be bullish on equities, provided that the valuation, is reasonable, and valuations are pretty reasonable.
Michael, a lot of our listeners, a lot of our YouTube viewers, they're used to a market that's led by big tech. Is big tech going to lead the next leg of this rally, or are we going into other areas?
That's the $64 question. I think you saw big tech lead the market on the way up through this volatility. You saw it kind of lead on the way down here. In other words, when people were getting cautious about the equity market, they were selling their winners there. I have a feeling that ultimately, when the dust settles here through this, what I would argue is seasonal volatility, that big tech will, and when we're talking big tech, we're talking, the Mag 6 or Mag 7.
Mag 8.
They are going to lead the way higher there. The valuation can't be excessive for that to happen, right? There. If we are going to be in a stock market where it's really defined and led by the everything else, I think the overall index returns will be a lot smaller than what we've seen last year with a 24% return for the SPX.
Your projection, besides vacationing in New Hampshire, living there, whatever, is an American guy. You're prodigious on Pacific Rim. I would say the greatest gloom trade out there right now is China. It can't get worse.
Yeah.
When do you go long China just based on the geopolitical international relations gloom?
Tom, I'm not particularly it's not on my front burner, and I don't think it's on a lot of people's front burners right now. You're dealing with a new sort of orientation of political philosophy. You can look at the FXI. You can see it sort of bumping around like a lot of beaten up stocks. It has its occasional moments of relief rally, and who knows, maybe we'll get into a big dollar weakening trend that's good for EM. I'm not sure that means a lot for the Chinese equity market, though. I think the overriding concern is where that economy is going, and it's a little anecdote here, but over the summer if I wasn't being bitten in black flies, I was in Venice, Italy for a few days with my wife, and I didn't see any Chinese tourists. I saw a couple, but very few. People said, there's going to be tons and tons of Chinese tourists. There were very few. The Chinese consumer is not what it used to be. The Chinese economy is not what it used to be. You're seeing that kind of resoundingly in the inflation. So I think there's so many other more obvious opportunity sets here with political risk that's more sort of comprehensible and understandable than what we're dealing with in China.
Fixed income. I mean, I used to just a cup of coffee ago, as Tom Keene would say, I was getting 5% on my 2-year U.S. government treasury. Now I'm down to 3.66% here. How do you put fixed income into the playbook these days?
Well, I think right now the fixed income bid has been resounding. Just what's happened in the 2-year, coming from 5% to where it is right now. I think it's been an extraordinary move. I don't understand the move, quite frankly. I think, and in fact, I'm actually bearish rates right now, meaning I'm expecting rates to move higher in the near term, at least on a tactical basis. Right now, there's more than 8 cuts priced through the May meeting. I think we're dealing with a Fed that is data dependent, and I think we're dealing with a Fed that's cautious. And if you look at what's happened to that 2-year yield just since last spring, it's moved a lot. Has the economy that different? We know inflation is the upside risk of inflation is behind us, but there's a stability at these current levels here. And at the same time, the economy, you look through a wide swath of metrics, you're not seeing recession warning lights glaring, right? And so 8 cuts to me says that there's a recession coming sometime in early 25, and to me, it's a speculative guess.
I got 30 seconds. It's too important. I got to get it in. You go back to S.G. Warburg in deal making. You were a CFO for some form of technology communications company. Do you trust the revenue, presence, and future of the Mag 7?
That's a great question. And you mentioned revenue, not earnings, right? Because that takes out the buyback.
At the top line,
you can't buy back revenues, right?
Come on. Yeah. I don't have the time. NVIDIA guy goes to Goldman Sachs and moves the market on one stupid comment over a cup of Sanka yesterday morning. Yeah. Do you trust these guys' revenue enthusiasm?
Look, you're picking on NVIDIA for understandable reasons. The Microsofts, the Googles, I think those revenue and earning streams are a little bit more obvious, a little bit more stable.
Right.
NVIDIA, of course, is a tricky one. It's a chip company. You go through the history of Intel, the ups and downs. Yep. It's cyclical.
Can you come back? Yeah. I know it's a long way from New Hampshire. Come back for Lisa and bring Lisa some LL Bean stuff from Freeport, Maine as well. We say good morning across the nation on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Futures up 7. It's Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks advancing, tracking gains in Asian markets as tech-fueled rebound spreads globally. Right now, NASDAQ futures, little change up though 12 points. We have Dow futures up 0.1%, 68 points. S&P futures up 0.1% or 8 points. The 2-year yield, 3.66%, up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 3.67%, and that's up 1 basis point. Check in with commodities. We have spot gold higher, 2,515 an ounce. We have Brent crude $71 a barrel, WTI crude $68 a barrel. Now, since I mentioned tech earlier, shares of NVIDIA up about 0.5%, but it surged more than 8% yesterday. That was because CEO Jensen Huang, he told this conference his customers more frustrated than they used to be because of the limited supply of its chips. And sticking with tech, sources say OpenAI in talks to raise $6.5 billion from investors at a valuation of $150 billion. After the bell, we move on to Adobe. Those shares up up 1%. And moving the markets, shares of Moderna. They were down about 9% earlier, now down about 6%. The company slashed its research budget as its vaccine sales, well, they disappointed. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it. One of the highlights in the last 10 days, and thank you, Mark Howard, out at BNP Paribas for driving this, in memory of Jack Melvey in fixed income. Jack Melvey was absolutely definitive, no other way to put it, iconic at Lehman Brothers. And as Mark Howard said, Jack Melvey had so much to do with popularizing, I'll get it out, the Lehman Brothers set of fixed income indices. All of us at Bloomberg are ecstatic that we've carried this tradition forward. Paul's been directly involved with this. I spoke to actually Tom Secunda the other day about it. The Bloomberg set of fixed income statistics, a series I should say, are absolutely definitive. Joining us now, David Rogel. Dave Rogel with BlackRock, of course, fundamental fixed income group with huge and prodigious chops. Dave, is it even feasible on the Bloomberg Aggregate Total Return Index, we could get back to the vector of the great moderation, that we could get price up and yield down over time to get us back to what we remember?
Well, good morning. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show. I think the outlook for bonds is improving significantly. After what has been a tough period, rates up, very high inflation rates. When you look at fixed income today, you can get you were getting close to a 2% real rate. If you look at the TIPS yields, now closer to a 1.5% real rate. And that compares to a decade of earning negative 1% real return if you're invested in cash, or you look at the real funds rate over the decade of the great moderation post-financial crisis, you lost 1% of purchasing power per year. You can now earn a positive real yield in fixed income with a relatively high quality portfolio. And importantly, we're going to start to see hedging value come back for bonds. We went through a period of time with very elevated inflation where hedging value was severely diminished. And as inflation continues to normalize, we think you'll see that hedging value return. And, in the ag, for example, as you cite, it's not inconceivable to expect a high single-digit return if growth were to falter significantly from here, which is not our base case.
I mean, Paul, I just did the fancy logarithmic monthly chart. I used, if you're out of Cornell in economics and biology,
math geeks,
you get this. I mean, come on. We're on a semi-log chart monthly. We're looking at the index. And I don't think, Paul, people understand how price up, yield down bonds have been in the last 7-8 months.
They've been good. And, David, unlike Lisa Mateo and Tom Keene or nervous Nellies, I'm willing to take some risk here. The Bloomberg U.S. Corporate High Yield Total Return Index, that's up 6.62% this year. Talk to us about the high yield market. Wow.
Yeah, high yield's been an incredible performer. The supply trends in high yield have been very favorable. And as I was speaking about before, you've had a market that's been very fearful of a growth recession that hasn't materialized. If you go back to 2023, last year, most forecasts were for some sort of growth recession in the second half of the year. That didn't materialize. You've had also a ton of demand for things like floating rate loans. It's been an incredible performer in fixed income. One of the best, high yield even has been one of the best performing sectors in fixed income in the last couple of years. I think the fundamentals of that market have improved over time. The supply trends are very favorable. You've had a rising proportion of, higher rated bonds in the high yield index. You do have a lot of dispersion down the cap stack in high yield. And we think you do need to be cautious, as, we have an uneven economy. We have but I think overall that market is, we're overweight high yield in our portfolios.
Take the knowledge base of BlackRock. I mean, I know you're not on speaking terms with Russ Kosterich or, Rosenberg or the rest of them, but Dave Rogel, come on, you're the adult in the room. What happens when 3-month or cash yields come down? What's actually going to happen to our listeners and viewers?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, Russ and Jeff are two of my favorite people. So, you know, I just spoke to Russ the other day.
This is the last time.
Yeah. So, you know, I think, you know, sometimes we were talking about this on another program. I think as the Fed normalizes policy, you will see the rate curve steepen out. You know, we've you know got an upward sloping 2s10s curve, but if you look 2 years forward, that curve is priced at around 50, 60 basis points.
Wow.
That's a pretty normal curve for a non-recessionary environment. You know, I think some people are expecting the curve to steepen out to 150 or 200 basis points. I don't think that'll happen unless you see a severe growth downturn, which is not in our base case. But I think as investors start to see the yield come down on money market funds, you got over $6 trillion in money market funds. As you start to see short-term yields come down, there'll be more of a drive to extend duration into intermediate products and move out the curve. And I think you're going to see more of that. But importantly, I think you do want to take an active approach in fixed income, and you do want to take a more diversified approach. If you look at index, over 40% of the ag index is treasuries. That weight was 20% going back 15 years ago. And as fiscal deficits continue to build, that weight's going to increase. So over 90% of the yield in that index is coming from the risk-free curve. And we think you want to be less reliant on that. You want to look, you know, we have a total return strategy that we think is a great diversified solution for investors to start to lock in higher real rates.
David, this
hold a lot fewer treasuries.
This has been wonderful. David Orcel, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it, particularly that's thoughts on the ability to get back to the trend we all knew and loved before 2019. Paul, what do you see?
Tom, he was a Phi Beta Kappa at Cornell. Is that good?
That's good.
That's good.
Yeah,
okay.
That means he went to the Rangovian embassy 5 times. Exactly. You got to go to the Rango 5 times. You don't get Phi Beta. You don't get Phi Beta in Ithaca. Futures up 8, Dow futures up 66. We're at 38 on the 7-hour mark. We've yet to do a data check.
Okay.
We failed.
I know.
I mean, there's no other way.
That's what happens when people are walking in space and doing
I'm not thinking clearly. Did you see the walk-off last night? Red Sox, Orioles?
Okay, I went to the game last night. I have to admit, I left in the 9th inning, and I missed it, but I caught it on the radio. But a phenomenal game. Soto hit a home run. He's just unbelievable. We got to keep him.
Yeah.
On a school night you went out?
Yeah, I went out on a school night, exactly. I took my sister, so she's a big baseball fan, so I had a good time.
I was talking at Fenway, or the Orioles, you know, it was a walk-off Red Sox victory.
It was a walk-off Yankee victory.
We're talking, the Red Sox are playing .507 baseball, and we're talking about them being in the postseason. Michael Barr is correct.
I know.
It's not.
I like it. I like it.
I love the first series, the 3 out of 5. Love it to death.
Yep.
But at the same time,
come on.
Do the Red Sox deserve to be in there?
I think the Sox always deserve it. It's always good when the Sox are there, I think. It's good TV.
Yeah, we'll see. You know, the future's up 8. It's a bull market. I mean, Tucker almost retired yesterday. You know, his 401k is killing it. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Right now, with our news in New York City, here's John Tucker.
All right, Tom, Paul, and Lisa, a billionaire stepped out for the first private spacewalk today, teaming up with SpaceX on the daring endeavor hundreds of miles above Earth. Kate Duffy is Bloomberg's aerospace reporter.
There's a lot of firsts with this mission. Obviously, primarily it being the first commercial spacewalk. You know, no other private company has done this before. SpaceX is the first. And this is going to just completely expand their sort of portfolio. You know, they have this sprawling space empire now, and clearly, you know, this is going to be a part of their portfolio.
Tech entrepreneur Jared Isaacman and his crew waited until their capsule was depressurized before popping open the hatch. Isaacman emerged first, joining a small elite group of spacewalkers who until now had included only professional astronauts. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris heading back on the campaign trail, but the former president casting doubt about whether he wants another debate with the vice president after his performance in Philadelphia Tuesday night.
When a fighter has a bad fight, gets knocked out, or loses the fight, the first thing he says is, we want a rematch.
Well, Trump picking his campaign back up today in Tucson, Arizona. As for Vice President Harris, she's headed to North Carolina for rallies in Charlotte and Greensboro. Her donors and supporters praising her debate performance. Democratic operative Philippe Reyes helped Harris prepare for Tuesday night, and he says her aggressive performance actually was not in the playbook.
It's not an offense-defense thing. It's making sure that you're getting out the facts, which is something that the former president has a problem with.
Well, the Harris campaign could also get a lift from Taylor Swift's endorsement after the pop star told her 283 million Instagram followers she's voting for the vice president. More than 300,000 people clicked on Taylor Swift's link to the government's voter registration website.
How many followers does John Tucker have?
About 2. House Speaker Johnson says there will be no vote today on Republicans' short-term spending plan to avoid a government shutdown. Johnson's proposal pairs the spending bill with a GOP measure that would require proof of citizenship from voters, opposed even by some in his own party. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, and Lisa.
Let's dovetail two technological marvels here. We could do this with surveillance congestion reporter John Tucker, who joins us now back from a summer where it was easy to move through the helix. John, we just had a spacewalk, two spacewalks of incredible technological sophistication. How's the helix in the Lincoln Tunnel doing?
Are you telling me we can send people to space on a spacewalk, but we can't fix congestion? Is that what you're saying?
Can't fix the Lincoln Tunnel.
No, well, yeah, it's been problematic. I mean, I've seen a lot of things in the Lincoln Tunnel because I've been doing it for 40 years now. The one that I caught on tape with my dash cam, when there was
the dash cam.
On the dash cam, it's worth a view. Slow down on the Lincoln Tunnel. What is going on? I look ahead, a bunch of about 12, 13 kids on bicycles, which raises the question, the Port Authority police, what were you thinking? But
the rule of thumb of the Lincoln Tunnel coming into the city is if you're there by 6 a.m., you're fine. 6:01, forget it.
Well, because the tolls go up.
Help our audience worldwide. What is the daily, the monthly tariff to enjoy the Lincoln Tunnel round trip?
What is it? It's on my Easy Pass. I don't know. It's overall the aggregate is
hundreds of dollars, right?
Like I've said, I pay more in tolls each month
than
I do for tolls and gas, the commuting costs that I do for my mortgage.
We're going to tie it all to the...
It's bigger than your mortgage.
Bloomberg Amex. We're going to tie it all to the Bloomberg Amex and let just Redo take care of
it. Redo stopped me in the food court once and he says, what's the helix?
Yeah.
We say good morning to Redo, keeper of the Amex here at Bloomberg Surveillance. Futures up 8, Dow futures up 60. The VIX really shows a bull market we've seen over the last 2 days. 17.82, nicely down from 19. 17.82. The Sweeney yield stable, 3.66% on the 2-year yield. Real yield, 1.62%. PPI coming up at 8:30. From New York City on YouTube, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Green on the screen, and this is after yesterday's reading on inflation. It reduced the chance of an outsized interest rate cut from the Fed. But Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon, he tells CNBC there's still a chance that policymakers could opt for a bigger rate cut than expected. He said there's a case for 50 based on the labor market. Today, we have more economic data, a read on producer prices, also initial jobless claims for last week. Let's check in with futures. So right now, NASDAQ futures, little change, up 14 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 57 points. S&P futures up 0.1% or 7 points. The 2-year yield at 3.66%, up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 3.67%, and that's up 1 basis point. Few companies making news. UniCredit, its CEO said all options are open for Commerzbank, including a possible takeover. UniCredit ADRs are little changed. And sticking with banks, after complaints about long hours, sources say J.P. Morgan plans to cap junior bankers' hours to 80 per week. Cap it at 80. While Bank of America,
back in the day.
That's where you started. Bank of America is going to more closely monitor their trainees' workloads. And finally, accounting giant PwC will let go of 1,800 U.S. employees next month. It's restructuring its tech unit. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Joining us now, Paul Sweeney, junior banker, 100 hours a week. Boy, is this, you're going to get a conversation going?
Back in the day, you'd get in around 9. Okay, you're not beating. The traders are in there at 6:30, 7 o'clock. You get in there at 9 in the morning. Around 6, you get dinner, and it was a good dinner. You get it catered in from anywhere you wanted it. Around 8, you start thinking about what's going on. How late am I going to be here tonight? If you're on a live deal, no holds barred. You stay as late as it takes. If you're not on a live deal, you're like, I'm thinking 9 o'clock, maybe 10 if I'm lucky. Okay, that's through Friday. Friday, you get out at like 5 or 6. Saturday, you probably come in, but you don't have to come in until like noon, 1 o'clock. You stay till 7. Sunday became kind of a work day. I mean, it kind of like noon till like 9 or 10. And if you're on a live deal, forget it.
I have said this in speeches at colleges, Lisa. I built my career on Saturday. I got more done on Saturday than I did the 5 weeks, doing all the garbage of the 5 weeks. In the weekends, I mean, Paul was more an IB in deal making, but the bottom line is this is a heated debate.
And if you're on a live deal or 2 live, there were times we were on 2 live deals, and you had 2 managing directors, 2 vice presidents beating on you to put your deal first, and that's when it got a little dicey.
Yeah, you'd
have to ask for a little help.
But also the mental health issues are tangible. I don't want to make light of that.
Sure.
There's some serious stuff here to talk about. But I'm glad you did that report. Right now, futures advance up 10.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
Your daily look at the front pages is Lisa Mateo hours. She works a 28-hour work week. It's brought to you by Interactive Brokers, their bond marketplace. Access Interactive Brokers' vast selection of over 1 million global fixed income securities. There are no markups, no built-in spreads, low transparent commissions. Learn more at ibkr.com/bonds. Lisa, what do you got?
Okay, we've been talking, right, about the first ever commercial spacewalk, so I want to start there. Okay, because the Wall Street Journal had this great look at the spacesuits that you were seeing. If you were watching on YouTube, you saw it. They were wearing the SpaceX developed spacesuits they hope will eventually be used on Mars. This is the first time they've been untested in orbit, so they're trying it out. They also had the Crew Dragon, the SpaceX's low Earth orbit vehicle. So between the spacesuit and the new vehicle, a lot going on with the
I was just noticing the spacesuit on the video that we were getting looked very cool. It was kind of fashionable a little bit, as opposed to the stuff we remember from NASA back in the 60s, you know, which these big, bulky types of things. These guys could move around a lot easier, it seemed like, and seemed pretty cool.
They could, and you have to check out the pictures of it.
Natick Labs, outside Boston. You go out, there's a thing called Natick Labs. And that, you know, we make jokes about Tang, and I mean, understand Tang is the vitamin C of the astronauts.
Right.
But the U.S. Army Natick Labs were I'm not saying they did the spacesuits, but people forget about that. Like, okay, what's the fabric? What are they going to eat? What if they throw up? Landing on the lunar module? What are we going to do in weightlessness if they, and they did, if they throw up. I mean, all this stuff is granular, and it's the many Natick labs around the nation. That's great. What else?
And you don't think about that. Also, SpaceX keeping the FAA busy. The FAA's Commercial Space Transportation Office, they said that SpaceX is getting the majority of their resources. 80% of the overtime that they log, which is hundreds of hours a month, goes to SpaceX. They say some of the delays you've heard about, the Starship, they've had different delays. They say it's because of changes the company made to the scope of its flight plan, also ongoing environmental review. SpaceX, though, it blames them for the lack of resources. That's why they say there have been some delays, but the FAA made it clear.
Try getting into Newark Airport on a Friday afternoon and talk about the FAA. SpaceX can take a backseat to me. I'll tell you what.
I was sitting there in the emotion last night of September 11th, thinking thanks to everyone.
Yep.
Lisa, you were great yesterday. I got this really privileged deck that I'm on, and there was a 747 Lufthansa coming out of Newark with the sun setting. It was spectacular. Newark is Newark. It's like, what did you say once? You said it's like an aircraft carrier.
Yeah, that's right.
Next to the Jersey Turnpike. What do you got, Lisa?
Okay, so Paul's been talking about the iPhone, right? The latest iPhone. He's going to get it, right?
You can pre-order Friday.
You can pre-order Friday.
I walked into the Verizon store on Lexington Avenue, and that's what I was told.
See? Okay, so he's going there Friday.
Yep.
But some bosses, they're using low-tech gear to show off their power. Things like pagers. The brick phone, those are coming back. The reason why...
Tucker's. John Tucker.
John Tucker can pull it out, yes. The reason why they're going old school is because they say they want a digital detox, right? They don't get emails and things like that on those kind of phones, so it gets them to kind of separate. It's also this sense of power, because you think about it, only a big shot can say, page me.
Right, exactly.
It's this power trip. They're saying it makes them better leaders because they can be fully present in meetings instead of being on their phone and not kind of paying attention, getting distracted.
Yeah, we were talking about the hours of junior bankers back in the day. One of the reasons we had to be in the office is there was no technology.
Right.
My bosses, they couldn't reach you. They couldn't zip a file to you and say, upgrade this model. You had to physically be in the office at your computer, which, by the way, were new at the time, back when I was in the day. But now with the technology, boom. You don't need anything. You can be anywhere, as we've learned here.
Yes, and they can get you at any time
of the day.
Yes, they can. That's the other thing. NFL opening weekend, huge, highest on record. NFL averaged 21 million viewers per game during its opening week. That's a 12% increase over last year. So if you break it down, what network kind of came out on top? NBC. You had the Kansas City Chiefs beat the Ravens. You had the Detroit Lions and the Rams. They were both pretty close games. So NBC came out on top. We had second. There was Fox. Tom Brady's first game as an analyst.
How did he do, Paul? Did you see that?
Yeah, the reviews were mixed at best.
Okay, give him a shot.
Yeah, give him a shot. He just started. He'll be fine.
He came in for the Patriots. I remember the afternoon. And when he did his first game with the Patriots, he was not mixed as best. I was like, who is this guy?
Exactly.
Yeah, one more quickly.
Yes. Quickly. Okay, so people were asking about Happy the elephant at the Bronx Zoo. Everyone's worried. They haven't seen Happy. Happy's disappeared. I got to end you with a kicker, right? So Happy, the Bronx Zoo has responded. Happy is fine. Happy just doesn't like to come out of its enclosure, likes to stay in the barn and get fed and special treats, only comes out when people aren't there. But there were a lot of questions about it because there were some issues with it. You had the activists who were saying Happy shouldn't be enclosed, Happy should be out in the public.
Where do you want Happy to be? I mean,
Happy, they're saying Happy should be out so people can see her or him. her,
okay.
50-year-old.
Does she have pronouns? Okay.
Yes.
If you were in Nashville, and you go down to Music Row off Broadway, and you look across the Cumberland River, there's a bridge which is out of a movie set, and it's been in a lot. So it was just in a Thomas Rhett video, Crash and Burn. It is and will always be the Shelby Street Bridge. John Bon Jovi yesterday, he wasn't a celebrity or that. He acted. And there was a woman in great distress on the bridge. They were filming something, I guess. And Mr. Bon Jovi went over and helped her to move away from the edge of the Shelby Street Bridge in Nashville. I've been on that bridge, and it's a relic from another time and place. John Bon Jovi yesterday just simply getting it done. There's no other way to say it. Good morning to Mr. Bon Jovi of New Jersey and of Nashville.
is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr on assignment on the West Coast. Lisa Mateo with us. John Tucker as well. Paul, I figured out it was Thursday, literally 20 minutes ago.
That's all you need.
September 11th rattles everybody in New York.
I tell you, I was at Yankee Stadium last night. They did a wonderful, wonderful job remembering 9/11, as the Yankees always do.
And we say thank you to all that contacted us about our coverage yesterday. What we saw yesterday afternoon, thank you, Goldman Sachs Tech Conference and NVIDIA, a lift to the market. Big tech leading the way. Futures now up 13. NASDAQ up fractionally. NASDAQ 100 up 0.2%. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning, and always brought to you by Commerzbank Advisory Assurance Tax. Discover game-changing strategies to maximize value, optimize performance, and manage risk. Put your businesses at the forefront. Do that with Commerzbank. Foundational support for us from Commerzbank. Thank you to that Commerzbank nationwide. Paul, PPI here on a Thursday, claims in 29 minutes. I guess it's a follow-on from what we saw yesterday.
Yeah, I've got my ECO screen going, ECO go. And again, we got the CPI data yesterday. On a core, came in at just a little bit higher than expected. We'll see what's happening with our producer friends as well today with PPI.
Good morning on your commute. Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, thank you. Good morning up the corridor from Washington, 99.1 FM, Bloomberg 1130, our flagship in New York, and 92.9 FM in Boston. Good morning to you as well. And then on YouTube, watch us on YouTube. I'll get out on the live chat here in a moment. Coming up for the half hour, Dominic Konstam of Mizuho. First from the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got futures advancing after inflation eased in August to a new 3-year low, setting up the Fed to begin gradually reducing interest rates at a meeting next week. We shall see. PPI, like you said, initial jobless claims coming in about a half hour. NASDAQ futures up 0.1%, 31 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 75 points. S&P futures up 0.2%, or 12 points. We have the 2-year yield at 3.66%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 3.66%, and that's up 1 basis point. Commodities, we have spot gold higher, $2,519 an ounce. Brent crude, $71 a barrel. WTI crude, $68 a barrel. Shares of NVIDIA up nearly 1%. It surged more than 8% yesterday. The reason why, CEO said the limited supply of their products frustrated some customers and raised tension. We'll stick with tech. Sources say OpenAI in talks to raise $6.5 billion from investors at a valuation of about $150 billion. Moving the markets, we have shares of Moderna down 8%. The company slashed its research budget. Its vaccine sales disappointed. And finally, McDonald's. They say they're going to extend that $5 meal deal into December in most U.S. markets. Merry Christmas. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Rob, out on YouTube live chat, thank you so much. He says Kansas City Royals are getting it done. They're not the pushover team they used to be.
No, they got a couple of really nice players I saw last night.
And they go in to see the Pirates. They're in Pittsburgh after what they did with you. And, they're in the game.
They are.
Thank you, Rob, from Kansas City. Good morning. Dominic Konstam with us, and just absolutely definitive, as Paul gave us wonderful perspective yesterday of Credit Suisse at Madison Avenue 23 years ago. The foundation that Neil Sauce did at Credit Suisse was a research of Dominic Konstam, surrounded by people like Young Turk, Ira Jersey, who now runs all of Bloomberg Intelligence Fixed Income. Dominic Konstam has the chart that has shown how wrong we have been for how long. It is the hair chart. And you take the interest rate, and then you forecast out what you think yields are going to do, and the whole racket always feels yields are going back up, back up, back up. And they look like wisps of hair on a chart. And for the most part, they've been wrong, wrong, wrong. What does the hair look like into 2025?
Well, the hair for a while, for the last year or two, obviously has had the market sort of begging for rate cuts from the Fed, and the Fed pushing back and back and back. So now we're sort of having another go at that, where basically the market's obviously deeply discounting Fed cuts, going under 3% in the year or two. So we'll see if the markets are wrong again. But obviously we're expecting the Fed finally to open the door to a fairly aggressive easing cycle. And so we would expect them to pretty much validate what the market is doing for the first time.
What's the Fed really looking at here? A lot of folks are saying that it's kind of moved away from its focus on inflation and maybe looking towards just economic growth, labor, that type of thing. What do you think they're really looking at these days?
Well, I mean, I think it's very clear, and Powell, for people who sort of dig deeply into the data and the Fed mindset, I think Powell's Jackson Hole speech was very profound. He basically took work that Governor Waller had been doing a year or two earlier on the labor market, and basically you look at the COVID labor market, you look at the pre-COVID labor market, you look at what has changed and normalized or hasn't changed and has yet to normalize. And it's that sort of normalization process that is creating great concern. The idea that, for example, layoff rates are very low still. You want to go back to pre-COVID layoff rates for a normalized labor market. And as soon as you do that, the trade-off between, for example, vacancies coming down and unemployment going up, that trade-off really deteriorates. So when the Fed is saying we're worried about the labor market, or we're looking at the labor market, it's not that, unemployment is 4.3%, that's not a bad number. That's not the point at all. It's the idea that if there is a further slowing in demand for labor in terms of vacancy rates dropping, the rate of increase in unemployment could accelerate, and the Fed could easily be facing a 5 or 6% unemployment rate. That's what they're focused on.
So if you were to go down that route, it would suggest maybe the next argument would be the Fed's late. They should have already been cutting rates. Are you in that camp?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's risk reward. Yeah, absolutely. I think they should be cutting rates, and they should start with a bang, not a whimper. That means 50-50, not
but
a 25.
Maybe the recent data took that off the table.
But
the CPI.
if you're going to look at if you're going to look backwards, or at the current data set, which is backwards, then obviously you're going to start with a whimper. But that's not necessarily the right thing to do. But Waller said last week, if they need to accelerate, they will. And I think they'll need to accelerate, basically.
We're math-free on Thursdays, but
Thankfully.
Let's go there. I'm sorry. There is a codified belief that a measured approach leads to a better anchored expectation out, where it gets almost an inertial force. I'm talking Newtonian physics jealousy here, folks. There's almost an inertial force, a weight advantage to being measured. Do you buy it, or should we be more like the world of Arthur Burns and do what we believe in, have a conviction?
Well, I guess, if you want to start, with a measured approach, and as long as you credibly commit to an accelerated sort of willingness to accelerate and become, if you like, less measured, then yeah, sure, you can do that. The Fed kind of did that with the inflation fight. They started with 25, they went to 50. Before you knew it, they were doing 75. And was that so damaging? Well, maybe with hindsight, it wasn't that bad, and they did get inflation under control. So yes, you could do that. I think it would be equally fair to say, though, it's almost like a smile, where if they're so sort of soft and, for example, didn't even cut rates, that would be an absolute disaster in the first place. And if they were so aggressive and started with 100, yes, that might be a disaster as well. It might panic people. So somewhere in between is where they're going, and it's a matter of choice. Yeah.
My take on this, Paul, is we presume we have a crystal ball.
Yeah.
It's all there. It's just math envy, and
I don't know.
I have trouble with it.
Yeah. Ira Jersey, I don't know. Real quickly here, we have a little bit of a look back now. We have a couple of years to kind of look back at inflation. Where did our inflation come from? Because that was a wicked bout of inflation we had.
What are you in the debate last night with Trump and
Maybe.
Harris?
Inflation was really insidious this time. People try and compare it with the 1970s. 1970s inflation was not nearly as insidious, not only as people remember it, but also economically when you look at it. And where it came from was basically companies jacking up prices and selling the same stuff for more but less of it.
I mean, it was really kind of like supply-driven, controlling it. And in economics, we call that things like price discrimination. It's all this sort of dynamic pricing, which now is all over the place, where basically consumers are having their sort of
airline tickets.
Yeah, exactly. Consumer surplus transferred to profit.
That's where it came.
That's where it came
At
from.
London School of Economics, the price discrimination question,
Right.
Paul, is airline tickets.
Yep. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon? Absolutely not. I mean, that's what it isn't. It isn't always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. It's partly due to corporate pricing acts, egregious corporate pricing.
But are they pulling back now? Do they go stable and help time?
We run a model that kind of looks at that, and you can show that the rate of increase in that, if you like, price discrimination has actually slowed down to a standstill. So we're taking a time out.
We're going to come back and pick up on this. This is too important for our listeners and viewers. We're 2 seconds.
Wow, how do we get that?
Konstam, his people,
wow.
Total tantrum. Rashudo called me up.
Yeah.
The pencils came out of his pencil protector.
Yep.
You got to take Dominic for 2, which is what we're going to do.
For that.
Dominic Konstam of Mizuho will continue with us. Futures lift up 12 with our news in New York City. John Tucker.
And history was made this morning in the vacuum of space.
TV1, you are go for manual hatch open.
Billionaire Jarek Isaacman and SpaceX engineer Sarah Gillis performing the world's first commercial spacewalk. The pair left the Crew Dragon craft in turn, with Isaacman going first. Well, outside of the Dragon, they conducted a number of motions to test out the mobility of the spacesuits. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris head back on the campaign trail 2 days after their debate in Philadelphia. After a night that had the former president on the defensive, Trump raising doubts on whether he wants another one.
Are we going to do a rematch? I just don't know.
Donald Trump telling reporters in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, that Kamala Harris wants another debate because she lost on Tuesday night. The vice president's donors and Snap polls say otherwise. Harris also hoping for a swift boost to her campaign. More than 300,000 people clicked on Taylor Swift's link to the government's voter registration website after she announced her Harris endorsement on Instagram. Francine moving inland across southeastern Louisiana after coming ashore as a Category 2 hurricane. Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carrollin says it's now north and west of New Orleans.
Heavy rain extends from the northern and northeastern side of the circulation. It will continue to push in. The good news is the winds have diminished to 50 miles an hour. Big threat now will be isolated tornadoes over parts of Mississippi and northern Alabama today and eventually western Tennessee, and also 3 to 5 inches of rain along the path of the system over the next 48 hours.
Bloomberg's Rob Carrollin. And the Postal Service's new delivery vehicles, they're not going to win any beauty contests. Tall, ungainly, windshields are vast, hoods resemble a duckbill, their bumpers are enormous. But the first handful of next-generation delivery vehicles are now getting rave reviews from letter carriers. Within a few years of the initial rollout, the fleet's going to expand to 60,000, most of them electric vehicles. Global news, 24 hours a day, and whatever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg.
John Tucker, thank you so much. Futures up 12, Dow futures up 72. The VIX showing the tendency of bull market, 19, 18, 17.71.
Yep.
Paul, I'm absolutely fascinated what banks nationwide do when we crack 5%.
Yes.
I mean, I just, at some point that regime, I got a 3-month T-bill of a 4.9907 off the Bloomberg, just a number that I've got there of BTMM. Like that,
Sure.
I do that function?
I know. I did not know that one. I mean, I learned one.
Oh, BTMM is
That's a good one. Okay.
Yeah, Ira Jersey
Treasury
would
and
put
money.
that up.
Oh, I see what we're doing there.
Ira
Okay.
Jersey would put that up on the screen at Credit Suisse
got a little
when Dominic Konstam walked by.
Exactly.
Just so he would look
smart.
look
I'm
smart.
working.
I'm looking at LIBOR. Dominic, LIBOR, it'll work. We'll have Dominic Konstam. We continue with him with Mizuho. Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures advancing. This is after underlying U.S. inflation unexpectedly picked up in August. Today, we'll get a look at the producer price index for last month. Bloomberg Economics anticipates another mild reading. We'll also get initial jobless claims for last week. That all comes in about 15 minutes. Right now, we head to futures. NASDAQ futures up 0.1%, 31 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 70 points. S&P futures up 0.2%, or 11 points. We had the 2-year yield 3.66%, up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 3.67%, and that's up 1 basis point. Some deal-making news. General Mills agreed to sell its North American yogurt business. It includes the Yoplait brand for $2.1 billion. It's to 2 French dairy companies. General Mills down about 0.2%. It was. Now it's up about 0.5%. 7NI shares higher, up 4% in Japan. This is after Couche-Tard said it would discuss increasing its offer price, so they're sweetening the deal. Couche-Tard down about 0.2%. And Nippon Steel making last effort to drum up some support for its takeover of U.S. Steel. Its executive vice president traveled to Washington for meetings yesterday. We have Nippon Steel up more than 1% in Japan, U.S. Steel up more than 2%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Hey, Lisa, thanks so much. One of the hallmarks of Bloomberg Surveillance, folks, good morning, listening and watching across this nation, is you get lucky when you have the right guest at the right time with breaking news. The ECB cut interest rates moments ago. That's not a surprise. That was widely anticipated. But the growth view, and they do this much clearer than the Fed, the growth view out to 26, looking at real GDP, looking at the animal spirit of nominal GDP, is absolutely stunning. Dominic Konstam is with us with Mizuho, with us all of his correlated abilities here. There's a call for weak dollar. George Saravelos over at Deutsche Bank just said no. He said people are going to be surprised at resilience of dollar off of tepid EU growth, one of the reasons. Is that where we are now, where Europe's just not getting it done?
Well, yeah, I mean, Europe and the rest of the world, I mean, China, obviously.
Leading the way.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of disinflation and there's a lot of weak growth, and the US has been standing out as a sort of bastion against that. But to be honest, I mean, the US is sort of following suit in a sense. At least it will either need to make the choice between cutting rates very aggressively to avoid as much weakness in growth perhaps going forward, or it's going to sort of suffer that growth as well. So I would not agree with with the dollar staying strong. I think the dollar is going to weaken, and it's not going to be precipitous, but it will basically have to weaken. Otherwise, you can imagine the strength of our dollar would actually import a lot more disinflation into the US from places like Europe and China. So we don't really want that. I mean, as it is, our inflation is going to target. We don't want it to go well below target, which is what would otherwise happen.
Paul, within this caution on growth, ECB, wages are still rising at elevated pace. Domestic price pressures are still high. That's the tension here.
Exactly.
Into 2025.
ECB cuts growth forecast for every year through 2026, a Bloomberg News headline reads. So, Dominic, Mizuho's a Japanese bank. You're a macro strategy. Where are opportunities, if there are, outside of the U.S.? Where do you see opportunities just generally when you talk to your clients?
Well, I mean, in terms of the sort of fixed income base, I mean, obviously there's a lot of interest in the Japanese fixed income markets.
And where did that come from? Because for 25 years, Tom and I didn't even talk about Japan.
Well, I mean, the BOJ has been buying a lot of JGBs, so there wasn't that a lot sort of available, if you like, for other investors to buy. So there was always a sort of concern around liquidity in that market. Now the BOJ is stepping back its purchases. Obviously, they've reduced them a lot. Interest rates are also normalizing, so there's some sort of yield being generated. So yeah, it's becoming a proper market, and so people are definitely very much involved.
So when you go back to, I'm guessing you go back to Tokyo once, twice, 3 times a year to see clients, if not to just, say hi to your boss back there. What's changed in Japan? Again, when I started in the mid-'80s, Tokyo was a tour of duty you had to have on your resume. And then after that, it fell off the face of the earth. Nobody talked about Japan. What's changed?
Well, I mean, it's become very international. I mean, I've been in the markets for a long time, and I've been to Japan many times. It's definitely become a very sort of international city. It's a very livable city.
Yep.
People are much more sort of open. It's also, believe it or not, very inexpensive. I mean, talk about the strength of the dollar. I mean, it's ridiculous. You can go to Japan, and it's very, very inexpensive, and the food is fantastic. So we love going to Japan. Yeah. Absolutely.
In the time we've got left, I think we have to turn to the United Kingdom. Certainly 6 months, 12 months ago, there was a shock that the growth was better than what everybody figured it would be. Is that a technology or productivity overlay? I have trouble looking for a constructive productivity story out of the United Kingdom. Am I wrong?
We're talking about the UK or the
UK?
Yeah. So. No, it's definitely a sort of productivity story. I mean, the technology is, very global, and I think, even Europe as well as the UK, they sort of mirror the US to some extent, in the sense that, we obviously have, productivity leading the way, labor inputs obviously a little bit sort of modest, it's a way, in a way, it's inevitable. I mean, in these developing countries, basically, when as you evolve,
right,
with very minimal population, that's the way your living standards sort of basically go up. There's a distribution of that, which becomes the issue.
The distribution is the key, and in America we see that within the election process as well. Just to get this in is just one final question. Dominic Konstam, we are seeing interest rate cuts. Can they rescue economic growth?
Absolutely. And the good news is interest rates are so high that they can come down a lot. There's also the good news that balance sheets pretty much across sectors, household and corporates, are actually in pretty good shape. The government is obviously a slight issue, but basically that means you don't have the sort of hangover that you've had in previous significant downturns. So this is what I would call a regular cycle. You just need to get rates down, and things will be basically fine.
How's the Fed going to do that? Do they go every period, or Tom and I, do we have to sit here and predict which meeting they're going to cut, which meeting they're not, once they do start?
Well, I mean, they basically should just do it as quickly as they can, do 50 basis points every period. If they want to start with 25, then go to 50, that's fine. But by the middle of next year, we should be pretty much at neutral, I'd say around 3% plus or minus. Yeah.
Can we this year, miracles are going to happen. Look at the Mets. Are you kidding me?
Okay. How about that?
Mohammed had to be medicated last night. It was so good. Can we get you and Rasciuto in together? I know you're not on speaking terms. But
exactly.
You and Steve Rasciuto in together.
We'll talk to the people.
Would be really special.
I do lots of meetings with them.
To do that for choice. Dominic Konstam working with Steve Rasciuto at Mizuho. I can't say enough about it. Again, we protect the copyright of all of our guest research. Look to Mizuho for the work
stuff,
of Dominic
Konstam.
I guess I got to do a euro data check here, Paul. I got a little bid to euro. It's tangible, 110.20. It's fractional move higher as well. Some of the headlines, I mean, Paul, this ECB not pre-committing to a particular rate path.
So it's just stay tuned.
That's a surprise.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
a headline.
Yeah, well, that's a headline on the Bloomberg terminal. But again, they cut the rates here by 25 basis points, kind of right in line with expectations, and we'll see what the Fed does September 18th.
Do you think Schnabel or someone from Germany, Netherlands, Accor just demands we have to have this headline? ECB to keep policy rates sufficiently restrictive as long as necessary.
I don't know.
It's just like, it's
ask Michael McKee what that means. I don't know.
Exactly. I mean, I think that some of this is really strenuous. 10-year German Bund yield falls after a 25 basis point rate cut. We see that as well here. So, it's going to be interesting. Lagarde will have a press conference. We'll probably drop into it and give you a few moments of that just to keep up with Christine Lagarde. And then we will monitor carefully the headlines, particularly after her prepared statement in Frankfurt. We're doing that, Rich, I don't know, half an hour? We do that 40 minutes after PPI? We're doing it at some point.
Need a camera in there.
I don't know. We'll have to see on it. My head hurts. The control room's
You've been working hard. I mean,
today.
It's Thursday though. We're there. We're almost there.
The control room's already to the weekend.
Yeah, they're there. They're mailing it in.
They're mailing it in. They got a function this afternoon, and they're going to skip biochemistry tomorrow morning. Futures up 13. Dow futures up 83. An important inflation series, the business inflation of America, and claims in 4 minutes as well. On YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. For Lisa Mateo, subscribe to YouTube.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We are just moments away from PPI initial jobless claims for last week, and this comes a day after a hotter-than-forecast measure of August core inflation. So ahead of it, let's check the markets. We have the NASDAQ futures up about 0.1%, 37 points. We have Dow futures up 0.1%, 133 points, and we have S&P futures up 0.2%, 11 points. The numbers are coming in. So for August, month-over-month PPI final of, let's see, the survey was for a tenth. It came in at 0.2%. Then you take out food and energy. That was the survey was for up 0.2% and went up 0.3%. And then we'll take a peek at initial jobless claims. The survey was for 227,000, came in at 230,000. The prior was 227,000. That got revised up to 228,000. Do we see a change in the markets? Right now, NASDAQ futures still up 0.1%, 20 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 75 points. S&P futures up 0.1%, or 9 points. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom, what's sticking out with you here as far as PPI is concerned?
I was looking at the Pioneer Grill menu at the Jackson Hole because that's where Nela and I last saw each other. Let's look at the economic statistics right now with a nice lift to the market coming off the festivities of yesterday. Paul, it's not the same mirror image that we saw yesterday. This is a little bit higher inflation fractionally than what we saw yesterday.
Yeah, looking at the PPI, Tom, PPI ex food and energy month to month, up 0.3%. The consensus was 0.2%, so a little bit hotter. Right in line with last period, though, so let's not go crazy. On an annualized basis, PPI ex food, energy, and trade, I think that's kind of the core. That was up 3.3%. And we had a negative revision on the PPI last month from flat, 0.0 to minus 0.2%.
I'm going to call it a churn to the market as well. You see that with the real yield still 1.62%. On your date calendar for tomorrow, Michigan sentiment. Do you think they're going to do that? They're not going to sentiment.
After Texas.
Austin, Texas.
Oh, boy. No, hopefully this was taken before the Texas game.
Yeah, we'll have to see. That's a joke, folks.
Yes.
It's like a little bit of...
They have football players and they have economists at the University of Michigan. Both
finance humor there. Nobody got it. Claudia Sam's never going to talk to us again. Our economic indicators here on Bloomberg Surveillance, and it's a real commitment, and we thank Commonwealth. Commonwealth supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor to staff ratio. Small firm attentiveness, big advisor impact. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about our consultative support and technology. Thank you, Commonwealth, driving all of our economic coverage. Thank you to Michael McKee as well. So, I'm at Jackson Hole, and I'm hanging out. I mean, it's me and Bramo. We're hanging out at the Pioneer Grill, and she's having, Bramo. Lisa Bramo at the Pioneer Grill, she asked for a yogurt.
Oh, God.
I thought the guy would.
Of course.
I couldn't believe it. Halima Croft's there from RBC doing oil, and Halima's, chowing down like 4 eggs. And it's like the English, except they call it the Wyoming.
Yep.
Nela Richardson's having the grilled trout. Fresh caught, the whole thing. I mean, it's great. Joining us now after Jackson Hole, Nela Richardson, chief economist at ADP, on where we are right now. Nela, my head is a jumble. I guess we're getting CPI and PPI surveys correct, but is the vector of disinflation actually entrenched?
I would say no to that question. And thanks for having me on. You didn't see me get the root beer floats after the trout, but that's fine.
They were great. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that there is no foregone conclusion on inflation. The drivers of inflation, those long-term drivers of inflation that kept it low and basically asleep for almost 20 years before this big upending of the pandemic, are not in place any longer. So you're talking about demographics, globalization, those used to suppress inflation. Now they're a tailwind to inflation. And so, no, nothing is pre-committed, not even the Fed. And so, yeah, when we see a little uptick in PPI, like we saw today, a bit of an uptick in CPI, we have to be a little wary of what direction this is going to go over the long term.
Talk to us about the labor market, Nela. I mean, nobody has a better view to the labor market than the good folks at ADP.
She signs my paycheck.
I think exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It's like the dollar. Nela Richardson
signs the paycheck. Nela, how would you characterize this U.S. labor market these days?
I think it's okay. If I were to grade it, I'd grade it a B minus. I think it's pretty good. We've seen unemployment stay relatively low, under 4.5% is low unemployment if you look at historical levels. But we're seeing less dynamism than we've actually have experienced in the past. People are staying put longer in the job. The U.S. labor market is characterized historically by this really dynamic churn. And we're not seeing the churn now. People are playing it safe, both employees, and that does worry me a bit. Also, the concentration of hiring has been really segmented in a couple of service providing industries like leisure and hospitality. And finally, manufacturing is just shedding jobs this year, taking a trend that we saw 6 months leading into the pandemic. So it's an okay labor market. It's enough to support consumer spending, but I wouldn't cheer it over a long horizon.
Okay, so why does Nela Richardson go to Jackson Hole? Why is she acclaimed at ADP? Questions like this. Nela, I need a dissertation right now on full-time versus part-time unemployment. The American tone is a full-time job is a real job, and a part-time job is for has-beens. Discuss what ADP sees in full-time and temporary jobs.
Well, we got to change that narrative, because what we're seeing is that more and more part-time, not full-time. In fact, we've seen a noticeable increase in part-time jobs. It used to be about 36% prior to the pandemic of all the jobs that we see, and we see a lot of jobs. 20% of the U.S. workforce we're seeing through ADP's payrolls. Now part-time jobs is about 42% of all jobs we see in the database. So people have changed, and the workplace has changed. People want more time. There's more opportunity to mix and match jobs based on your skill set. Remote work makes working multiple jobs easier. So it could be coming from the workforce preferences. It also could be coming from employers who have filled their bench with workers, but each worker may be asked to work fewer hours per week. So we're watching that very closely.
Nela, thank you so much. Nela Richardson with us with ADP. Just can't say enough about her analysis of the American labor economy. Claims 230, last week revised 228. I think she nailed it in that it's not the nirvana that we saw 6, 8, 9 months ago, Paul Sweeney. But come on, 5 years ago, 230 would have been celebration.
Sure,
been,
absolutely.
Great number.
I mean, I'm thinking about this whole part-time thing she was talking about. Maybe we don't have to work full-time. I mean, she's saying 40% of the people out there working.
Yeah, I think the bankers that,
go talk to, Colin and see if we can work something out here.
Well, the Wall Street, story that Lisa Mateo had, they can cut back from 80 hours a week to 72.
Sure.
Makes a big difference in your
good for
quality
them.
of life.
Quality of life. My goodness. You got to get it, just get it done, however it takes.
I think the labor economy is 5 years from now, folks, you're going to look back on end of pandemic, and you're going to have better information on productivity, and particularly, and Trichet would say this, the diffusion is the word the engineer from Lyon would say, the diffusion of technology. We don't understand it.
Well, how about this time? After the show, walk downstairs, go out on Lexington Avenue. There's a bank in the corner of our building on 60th Street. It will be packed with people with their laptops open, doing what? I don't know. But I think
Scarlett Fugo's down there.
I'm sure she does. But I saw Scarlett fill Yankee Stadium last night.
Did you?
I did. Talk about a star sighting.
Was she there with Henrik Lundqvist?
Maybe she's called down. It was great to see Scarlett. But
she's sitting down with Paul Simon.
Oh yeah, she's down.
She's down.
Exactly.
In that little corner there next to the dugout.
Yep, exactly. So
I mean, she's huge.
What are these people doing down? Working in these Starbucks all day, I don't know, but I think they're contributing to the economy. I think.
Shout out now, years ago with Scarlett Fu's great effort. We say good morning a day after a wonderful celebration on Park Avenue at the offices of Cantor Fitzgerald, Edie and Howard. Mm-hmm. They own the best Wall Street effort at what to do off of a tragedy 23 years ago. Thanks
658 Cantor Fitzgerald employees were lost on 9/11. Tom.
Tara, I've had the privilege of meeting Howard Lutnick's kindergartner, which changed Howard's life, of course, and all of Cantor Fitzgerald on September 11th and September 12th. They do a great charity effort on Park Avenue there to raise funds. Futures up 2. With our news in New York City, here's John Tucker.
All right, Tom Paul and Lisa, Elon Musk and his SpaceX have pushed the boundaries of commercial space flight this morning. The 4-member crew that lifted off from Florida's Kennedy Space Center settled into orbit aboard SpaceX Crew Dragon for today's mission highlight.
SpaceX's go for spacewalk operations.
One at a time, Jared Isaacman and Sarah Gillis stood in the hatchway to test out a new spacesuit design. Before he climbed back in, Isaacman shared the view.
It's gorgeous.
A tech billionaire, Isaacman, funded the mission. It's been downgraded, but still packs a punch. Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn has the update on Francine.
Francine is weakened to a tropical depression while the tropical storm warnings along the Gulf Coast have been discontinued. It will continue to move northward over south-central Mississippi. It's moving off towards the northeast at about 12 miles an hour. It's in the vicinity of Jackson, Mississippi. The big problem now with the system is going to be some very heavy rain, particularly across the Florida Panhandle, where there may even be some severe thunderstorms. We'll also see moderate to heavy rainfall across Arkansas, northern and central Mississippi, southern and southwestern Tennessee, much of Alabama, and much of Georgia today. I'm Rob Carolyn, Bloomberg Radio.
Donald Trump and Kamala Harris heading back on the campaign trail today after a brief pause, the former president casting doubt on whether he wants another debate with the vice president. 33,000 Boeing workers are delivering a taste of what could come if they vote to walk out at midnight.
Strike! Contract's not fair!
They're protesting last night in Seattle. Boeing's CEO says a work stoppage would harm efforts to turn around the plane makers' factories after years of turmoil. And House Speaker Mike Johnson says there will be no vote today on Republican short-term spending plan to avoid a government shutdown. Johnson's proposal pairs the spending bill with a GOP measure that would require proof of citizenship from voters. That's met opposition even from Republicans. Congress needs to pass a stopgap spending bill before October 1st to avoid a partial government shutdown just weeks before the election. Global News, 24 hours a day, and whatever you wanted with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Lisa, Paul, Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much, particularly the coverage there of Hurricane Francine down in the Gulf. Speaking of Hurricane Francine, joining us in the next hour, Francine Lacqua will join us. She is a hurricane. You should see her with her offspring. I mean, it's like a threat to London society. But she's leading the way. Francine's leading the way in a conversation, Paul, that you and I have been waiting and waiting for decades. When do the European banks finally mate like the banks mated in the United States?
Exactly right.
We've waited and waited. This is UniCredit and Commerzbank. It's a 9% position. It's just stunning how it's taken so long.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. I mean, you think about here in the United States, the J.P. Morgans of the world, the Citis of the world, the Bank of Americas of the world, how they've gotten so big via acquisition, how they've become global behemoths. And in that time, the European banks, the once great European banks, I think, have just been kind of left behind because they have not been able to adapt to a global marketplace by getting bigger. And so maybe this may be the beginning of some European consolidation.
Macarena Monez writing for Bloomberg, and this Kian Abuhassan at J.P. Morgan saying the banking M&A in Europe, it starts with little transactions like this, just the start of European banking M&A. Hurricane Francine will join us in the next hour. Futures up 8, Dow futures up 58 as well. The VIX 17.67. From New York City on YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures advancing after U.S. producer prices rose slightly more than forecast in August. That was thanks to a rebound in the cost of services. Weekly jobless claims rose 2,000 to 230,000 last week. That was above estimates, above the prior week. We have NASDAQ futures little changed, up about 16 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 72 points. S&P futures up 0.1% or 9 points. The 2-year yield at 3.62%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 3.64%. down 1 basis point. To earnings we go. Kroger up 0.5%, lifted its full-year guidance. That was thanks to consumers prioritizing their spending on groceries and other essential items. Alaska Air up nearly 4%, boosted its outlook for third quarter profit, strong summer demand, and also lower than expected fuel costs. And finally, shares of Boeing down 0.5%. Workers vote today on a new labor contract. The plane maker is bracing for a potential strike. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. A number of things. Nadia Lovell will be with us here in moments with UBS. Really looking forward to that important discussion on these equity markets. I just want to touch in on this to attach the voice to the moment of European central banking. Here's Christine Lagarde, the beginning of her press conference.
Rate, the rate through which we steer the monetary policy stance, by 25 basis points. Based on our updated assessment of the inflation outlook, the dynamics of underlying inflation, and the strength of monetary policy transmission, it is now appropriate to take another step in moderating the degree of monetary policy restriction.
So let's come out of that right now.
Have come in broadly as expected.
Yet from Jerome
latest
Powell.
ECB stock projections confirm
I'm having trouble with my microphone here. It's because Michael Barr's not here to control the Detroit Lions blue button. There we go. Christine Lagarde there with prepared comments, and they'll go into the Q&A. We'll bring you those headlines as we can. But again, this is the idea. And I'm sorry, it's got a little bit of Larry Summers to it, Paul. It's a little bit of stagflation with a lower growth and, fractionally higher inflation. I don't see the word stagflation there, but that's what the headlines are telling me.
Yes, suggest it, Tom. I mean, we've got the ECB cutting rates. Presumably the Fed will begin to cut rates on the 18th. And the question is, are these central banks, are they in line with where the economy is? Maybe you're a little bit behind here,
Right.
so some people would suggest.
For those of you with the equity markets and really the swing that we've seen early August, early September, and what we observed yesterday off NVIDIA and a Goldman Sachs tech conference, joining us now for the conversation of the day on equities, Nadia Lovell, Senior U.S. Equity Strategist at UBS. Nadia, I've got to go to the question of surveillance this week, which is, do you frame out double-digit earnings growth within UBS's optimism of being in the market?
Yeah, we continue to have confidence in the direction of earnings growth, and that's because we are more in the soft landing camp. I mean, the market is going to ping pong back and forth between a soft landing and hard landing narrative. The data is slowing, but it's not weak per se, and it's not falling off of a cliff. We think that the normalization process is happening, and yeah, there could be some air pockets along the way, but some of the growth concern is somewhat, somewhat puzzling to us, I would say, because you have third quarter GDP that's tracking at 2.5%. I mean, that's above trend growth. And
right.
I think also what gives us confidence is some of what we're hearing from corporation in the last couple of weeks from these conferences that has been going on. The consumer still remains resilient. We heard that from retailers last week, as well as from banks this week, where credit quality remains benign.
Nadia, stay with us. We're going to extend this as we can. We have a special guest right now, and this was demanded by Michael Barr. Michael Barr traveled to the left coast last week, or Monday, I should say, to see 49ers sneak by the New York Jets. We have surveillance Jets correspondent Mohamed El-Erian with us right now. They had a good game. I mean, they showed up against Super Bowl level 49ers, didn't they?
Sneak by, good game. I'm not sure what game you were watching.
Yes.
I think you were watching the first quarter.
Yes, watching the first quarter.
Beyond that, it was a very humbling experience.
Right.
Tom, and I hope we learn from this humbling experience.
We're going to learn from it against the Titans here, and then the dreaded New England Patriots.
On a Thursday night.
On a Thursday
night. You
night.
think that's fair? A Monday night on the road, then another game on the road, and then a Thursday game?
Okay, but this is more important than Taylor. Stop. This is more important than Taylor Swift in Paris. Are you going to attend at Gillette Stadium in Boston, Jets, Patriots?
I will not. I will be in the United Kingdom watching it in
doing
the
your day job.
How do you feel about your Jets this year? I mean, it wasn't a good starting point, but at least Mr. Rodgers is healthy. He's upright still.
He is upright, but I must tell you, I don't enjoy watching a game when you wonder whether the next snap is going to be an issue.
All right. I know your Sikorsky's waiting, Mohammed. Let me get to the Fed question as best as I can. We are redefining Greenspan measured. The ECB, with their fractious politics, which Lagarde handles adeptly, they're redefining measured. Powell's dealing with the legacy of measured in America. Will we be measured forward, or do we be more ad hoc in an Arthur Burns way?
That's a really interesting question. I think we will be measured forward, meaning we will go at 25 basis points. We won't get dramatic series of 50s, but we will be measured for the wrong reason. We'll be measured because the Fed will remain overreactive, meaning it will be too data dependent and will not be forward leaning. I think the key issue about Greenspan, Bernanke, and Yellen, what they were willing to lean forward and take a view of the economy. Chair Powell is not there yet.
Okay, Mohammed El-Erian, thank you so much. I know the schedule busy today. Thank you for dropping by here. Dr. El-Erian, in extended comments with Lisa, John, and Amory earlier, we're thrilled he could stop by to give us the proper treatment on the early season Jets. Nadia Lovell has been more than patient. Nadia, thank you so much for that. With Dr.
Mohammed can interrupt me anytime.
No, please, Nadia. Nadia, I want you to explain to those afraid how to participate in the stock market.
You know, we think that you have to take a balanced approach at this stage in the cycle. I mean, we continue to like tech, but quite honestly, Tom, we did dial back our tech overweight just a little bit last month, but we do continue to advise, leaning into tech and any sort of pullback to able to build those longer term positions, particularly around AI. And then I would add in some cyclical exposure with financials, a little bit of choppiness this week coming out of the Barclays conference, but I think that there's still a good story about financials and the ability to see a pickup in loan growth, as well as deposit costs coming in, and then add a bit of a defensive with some exposure to utilities.
So, Nadia, we did have a rotation trade there earlier in the year where small cap stocks and maybe some of the other parts of the market outside the Mag 7 were outperforming. Does that still have legs?
It does still have legs in terms of a broadening out, but I think in that broadening out, you still have to remain selective and skew towards quality. We are neutral on small cap, but I think that even with exposure to small cap, you want to stay up on the quality spectrum. Some of the broadening out that we want to add to is that cyclical exposure, and that includes the financials that I've talked about as well.
What are you doing with cash? I'm asking for Paul. Paul just sent me a text. He said, ask her about cash.
Exactly.
Nadia, what's UBS do with cash?
I thought cash was your thing, triple levered.
Oh, no, well, that's different. Nadia, don't be smart. We're in registration for the Forpal leveraged ETF. It's, we're looking 2025. What do you do with cash, Nadia Lovell?
You've got to put cash to work. I mean, the Fed is about to cut. We know that debate is still there, whether it's 25 basis points or 50 basis points, but the cutting cycle is starting. And therefore, what you're going to be able to yield in cash is going to continue to go down. And so we would look to be adding some of that cash into quality equities and also a bit into fixed income.
One of the themes that I'm looking at your notes, Nadia, that you guys at UBS Wealth Management like here is the housing recovery. Talk to us about that theme and given the interest rate outlook, I think most people have here.
We know that the housing market has been somewhat stalled out due to the higher mortgage rate environment and the lock-in effect that's happening. This is not a demand issue, it's more of a supply issue. And so we've even seen a pickup in mortgage activity just with the mortgage rate coming off of that close to 8% and now dipping under 6.5%. So as that continues to go lower, we think that you will see further pickup in housing activity. You also have quite a bit of the presidential candidates that seem to want to put policies in place to be able to help support the housing market and add more supply. So we would love to add to our housing exposed name, not only the builders, but also those, the furniture companies and everyone in that sort of ecosystem that will benefit from a pickup in housing activity.
Nadia, the equity market, the feeling is we're in a bull market. And with the volatility that we've seen, how do responsible investors withstand the media shock of an early August and early September? How do you survive through the ups and downs of the new volatility?
Yeah, August, you want to stay grounded. And what we've been advising clients is to have a plan, right? And that plan includes having a shopping list. And that shopping list should include some quality company, but not only what to buy, but things that you might want to consider to sell if things become volatile. I mean, August was very swift. As we know, it lasted just a couple of days and the market has since bounced back. We do expect September and October seasonally, they just tend to be very more volatile period, particularly in a political environment in terms of the presidential elections. So you just want to say once you have a plan, a longer term plan, and very methodical about it, that will help to continue to ground clients. And that's what we've been advising.
Nadia Lovell, your class act in this segment. Mohammed El-Erian and Nadia Lovell can't do better than that. Yep. Ms. Lovell is with UBS. Paul, I'm looking here, Patriots, Jets. And Mohammed, as he was walking out, he says, that's a good idea. I mean, first of all, it's almost sold out. I mean, they're mental up there.
Oh, crazy.
It's like nuts. Good morning, 92.9 FM in Boston. Mohammed's looking at section 111A,
that sounds
row 3.
Okay.
I mean, it's like an El-Erian seat. 2 of you before parking is $1,900.
Wow. Okay.
That's not the most expensive ticket, but it's the one that gets you that.
Well, you got to be close, yeah.
You need to get close to Aaron.
And I might get an adult beverage or two, so you got to put that.
Yeah.
on top
What are they, like $20?
Exactly.
I mean, what was Yankee Stadium?
Oh
last
my
night?
goodness, you had to take out a second mortgage, but they take care of you up there at Yankee Stadium.
Were you down low there with Edie and Paul and
No, we had good seats. We were happy. The great thing about it is from the Bloomberg global headquarters, 4 subway stops on the number 4 train.
Seriously.
You're there, no problem.
And, how about the Mets? I mean, they traded for Scott Havens, and they were just like, that's it. We got Scott Havens. Let's go. Let's win. We're not talking enough Mets. Bramo.
No, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. And they've been winning on this great streak.
The way they're winning.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, last night was a great one. Lindor.
I promise, folks, we'll do more
contract.
Mets. I mean,
and how about those Orioles? We can't talk baseball without talking the Orioles because we have some.
Because the Rents do.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll have to see. We're having fun with this
Orioles.
as we can. We need to say thank you to Kate Duffy and John Davies.
Yes.
In London, of all places, leading Bloomberg's new aerospace coverage. Really something today to see a spacewalk from orbit. Thank you to them for all that work with Bloomberg News. REM to exit.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr on assignment, Lisa Mateo with us, and John Tucker helping out as well. We say good morning to all of you across this nation. Lift to the market, but not as lifty as it was before. Inflation data 30 minutes ago. Paul, it was sort of ho-hum and all that. I think we're looking for more news, like somebody like the leader of NVIDIA saying business is great.
Right.
We got that yesterday. We need that today.
We need that today here. And I think some of the news just coming out in the last several minutes here, coming out of the European Central Bank, Tom, Francine Lacqua says Eurozone growth risks are tilted to the downside.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, I guess, what we've kind of known. But when you hear it starkly, it just kind of gives you a little bit of a pause here about the global economic
I had a massive fight this morning at 3 a.m. I came in and, I'm with the team and we're having our morning tang.
Yep.
And, should we take the Lagarde press conference in entirety? And the answer is we do such a great job in Frankfurt with the headlines. You just read the headlines. Yep. Risk to growth tilted to downside. And what's important in here is she slipped this in, and this is Lagarde off her Jackson Hole speech of 2 years ago. She says, Lagarde, Draghi report stresses urgent need for reform.
Okay.
And that's getting some play. I mean, in this hour, David Gurr is going to be with us on a special project, and also Hurricane Francine will be with us. Francine Lacqua scheduled to be with us. And part of that reform is banking in Europe, which is really germane to global Wall Street and U.S. Wall Street as well. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning, we're brought to you by Interactive Brokers and their Forecast Trader. You can trade your views on key economic, key climate indicators. Visit ibkr.com/forecast and get started today. Red and green on the screen, the VIX 17.73. From the Interactive Broker Studios with our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got little movement in futures after another inflation reading came in a bit higher than expected. U.S. jobless claims pick up for the first time in 3 weeks. So right now, S&P futures up about 0.1%, 5 points, and that's after a 3-day advance. Dow futures up 0.1%, 43 points. Nasdaq futures, little change, down about a point. We have the 2-year yield, 3.64%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 3.65%, and that is little change. Currencies, yes, want to point out the euro. Right now, it's up about 0.1%. This is after the ECB lowered interest rates for the second time this year. It's at 110.28. Companies making news. UniCredit, its CEO said all options are open for Commerzbank, including a possible takeover. UniCredit ADRs, they are a little changed. And we'll stick with banks. We talked about this earlier. After complaints of long hours, sources say JP Morgan plans to cap junior banker hours to 80 per week, while Bank of America moved more closely to monitor trainees' workloads. And finally, Microsoft cutting 650 jobs in its Xbox unit. That's according to a memo. Yeah, lots of Bloomberg Business Flash, Tom and Paul.
When did they get out of that rack? I mean, that's the key.
Like gaming was like the future. Yeah, I don't know.
They did Activision.
Well, I think gaming, I view gaming as like the movie business. It's a hit-driven business unless you have a franchise, like Call of Duty or something.
Okay, Julia Coronado scheduled to be with us. We were going to have a complete inflation report with Michael McKee. No one cares. Michael McKee, walk-off Red Sox home run last night against the dreaded Baltimore Orioles. I mean, do you actually believe the Red Sox playing .507 ball could get it done?
It's going to be tough. But this weekend will tell because they're in Yankee Stadium.
Julia Coronado insisted we listen. Let's listen.
Right. Swing to high drive. Way up there. Way back. Way gone. The Red Sox walking off at Fenway.
Oh, I got 1986 goosebumps. Okay. Come on, the Mets are killing it. They traded for Scott Havens, got him. We got the Red Sox. We got the Red Sox on a roll. I mean, can we redream a Lenny Dykstra oil can Boyd moment?
Oh, we can always redream. I don't think Red Sox fans are going to want to redream a Mookie Wilson moment, but you never know.
Yeah.
But
then there's Mookie Betts, who we.
Mookie's out. That Mookie is now out in L.A. Yeah. The Mets were exciting last night.
It is. We've committed.
They go into the ninth inning being no hit.
Yes,
and they win 6-2. You got to feel for that.
Bramo pulled me aside yesterday in the food court and read me the riot act. I mean, she says we're unfair. So I got to read it on the Mets this weekend.
All right.
I'm up to Lenny Dykstra. The ball he hit off oil can Boyd, it's never come down. It went over Everett, Massachusetts. It's still in orbit. Michael McKee, thank you so much. We'll do inflation. Of course, Mike McKee leading all of our economic coverage worldwide. We digress to Julia Coronado, President, Macro Policy Perspectives. Thrilled she's with us this morning. Julia, what does the character of our Fed parlor game into 2025? Do we just give it up in exhaustion and do something different?
No, I think there's going to be some interesting things going on, Tom. I mean, we've got a dynamic economy. The narrative of last year is fading away, and there's a new narrative of, look, the global economy is slowing down a little bit, and central banks are having to cut to try to keep that soft landing on track. Are they going to be successful? It would be historic feat if they are. It looks like the odds are pretty good now, but I'm sure there's going to be twists and turns as we go along through the remainder of this year.
So to what extent, Julia, do you think the economy is slowing down if we assume that inflation's been more or less tamed, that now the focus needs to be on growth? Where are we?
Well, I think, when I'll go back to my basic training at the Fed. The best indicators we have in real time are from the labor market. GDP is 1,000 different things that we're measuring imperfectly in real time, and we add them all up. So yeah, we look at that, but take that with a grain of salt and look at the things that we measure better, which we have lots of measures of the labor market. We have jobless claims, we have the employment report, we have surveys of businesses, we have surveys of consumers. We now have big data from companies like Indeed and LinkedIn. So we've got a lot of information, and it's comprehensive. The labor market is every sector. And the labor market tells us that things are slowing down. They're still okay, but the direction of travel has been to less labor demand. That's the key. There's some people saying, oh, it's all labor supply. That's what's leading the unemployment rate to drift up. False. It is clearly a decline in demand. Hiring is slowed. Job openings have slowed. Business surveys show very lackluster hiring. We scrape earnings reports, also very low hiring intentions. It's true we do not see big layoffs outside the tech sector, and that is reassuring that that labor hoarding dynamic is still with us. But if I were an official, I'd be not taking too much comfort. I mean, if they were already seeing mass layoffs, they'd be way behind the curve. So time to get going, time to march on, get some juice back into the economy and keep things on track.
Getting juice back into the economy, does that suggest our Fed should do 50 basis points in cuts come September 18?
You know, they're not going to, more than likely, but they're in an odd position because the market is priced for at least one 50 basis point move between now and year end. So their communication next week is very tricky. They have to kind of tell us, yes, we're cutting, and they probably aren't going to put a 50 basis point move in their baseline, but they need to indicate a willingness to move a little faster if unemployment keeps rising. The unemployment rate already triggered the Sohn rule. Now we know that means something different in the current environment, but it's not meaningless at all. It tells us unemployment is rising.
You're killing me. I mean, Jackson Powell, listen to me. Jerome, you know what the FT calls him on first reference?
What's that?
Jay.
Jay?
Colby Smith calls him Jay. That's un-American. Jerome Powell, Julia Coronado was clear as a bell in Jackson Hole. Why don't we get that same clarity? Come on, we're going to get that same clarity September 18th. It's an election year. He's not going to come in with some gloom.
I agree. He did. I loved the speech at Jackson Hole. He was very clear. He said, we do not seek or welcome further cooling in labor market conditions. Great. And that is why the market is still priced for at least one 50 basis point move. We don't need to have our hair on fire right now, but we do need to take where we are seriously and pivot policy and put some relief back in. We just got several warnings from banks this week about stressed out consumers. We know there's still a wealth effect boosting high-end consumers, but middle and low-income consumers who are carrying debt on car loans or credit cards are feeling the pinch, and they are no longer getting the big raises that they got in the extremely hot labor market a year or two ago. So yeah, they're feeling a little strained, and that tells you policy tightening is taking effect, and time to ease off a little bit, time to put some relief back in.
Dr. Coronado, thank you so much. Julia Coronado, Macro Policy Perspectives. And this is the first time I've said, oh, yeah, there's a Fed meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know it was Thursday today. That's how my head's spinning. But, I mean, Red Sox walk-off Mets. I mean, the world's turned upside down. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, Tom, Paul, and Lisa. A billionaire stepped out for the first private spacewalk today, teaming up with SpaceX on the daring endeavor hundreds of miles above Earth. Kate Duffy is Bloomberg's aerospace reporter.
There's a lot of firsts with this mission. Obviously, primarily it being the first commercial spacewalk. You know, no other private company has done this before. SpaceX is the first. And this is going to just completely expand their sort of portfolio. You know, they have this sprawling space empire now, and clearly, you know, this is going to be a part of their portfolio.
Tech entrepreneur Jared Isaacman and his crew waited until their capsule was depressurized before popping open the hatch. Isaacman emerged first, joining a small elite group of spacewalkers who until now had included only professional astronauts. Donald Trump, Kamala Harris heading back on the campaign trail, the former president casting doubt on whether he wants another debate with the vice president after his performance in Philadelphia Tuesday night.
When a fighter has a bad fight, gets knocked out, or loses the fight, the first thing he says is, we want a rematch.
Well, Trump is picking his campaign back up today in Tucson, Arizona. As for Vice President Harris, she's headed to North Carolina for rallies in Charlotte and Greensboro. Her donors and supporters praising her debate performance. Philippe Reines helped Harris prepare for Tuesday night. He says her aggressive performance was not in their playbook.
It's not an offense-defense thing. It's a making sure that you're getting out the facts, which is something that the former president has a problem with.
The Harris campaign could also get a lift from Taylor Swift's endorsement after the pop star told her 283 million Instagram followers she's voting for the vice president. Well, yeah, a little short maybe. More than 300,000 people did click on Taylor Swift's link to the government's voter registration website. Tunisian authorities have arrested 4 people after the state railway company mistakenly flew the Turkish flag instead of the national one, as efforts stepped up to enforce the ultra-patriotic fervor ahead of October elections. Actually, a big deal there.
Big deal, being watched carefully.
Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg.
So
Lisa.
if the kids came out and they said, Dad, I want an EV car, I mean, you got to go with the Fiat. It's like Audrey Hepburn could be driving this thing. It's the E500. It's a spectacular car. They're stopping production in Turin, Italy.
Are they?
They're not selling them.
Well,
if you can't sell a little, Lisa, if you can't sell a little cute Fiat E500, how are you going to do it?
Where are we going with this?
No, I mean,
I've
EV
never even
cars.
looked at a Fiat.
I don't know. People say it's a bump in the road. I think it might be something more. I don't know.
I don't know. The EV story, huge for 2025. From New York City on YouTube, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures, well, pretty much treading water as another faster than estimated inflation reading did little to change those bets on Fed rate cuts. Right now we have NASDAQ futures up about 3 points, Dow futures up 65, S&P futures up 0.1% or 7 points. To the bond market, the 2-year yield 3.64%, little change. The yield on the 10-year 3.66%, and that is little changed. Some deal-making news. General Mills agreed to sell its North American yogurt business. It includes Yoplait for $2.1 billion. It's the two French dairy companies. General Mills shares are little changed. And Nippon Steel making its final effort. They're trying to drum up some support for its takeover of U.S. Steel. Its executive vice president traveled to Washington for meetings yesterday. So we have Nippon Steel up more than 1% in Japan. U.S. Steel up more than 1%. And Seven & I shares higher, up 4% in Japan. Couche-Tard was said to be talking about sweetening the deal, raising its offer price. Couche-Tard down 0.2%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Lisa Mateo, that is your Bloomberg Opening Bell Report. Paul and Tom.
Thank you, Lisa, so much. We're in a press conference in Frankfurt, Germany. I remember the press conference when Farrow was there.
Yeah.
And they go Bloomberg, and the room, you could hear pin drop in the room. And he would go.
It's that Farrow guy.
And he would do a follow-up. And then he'd do a follow-up with a follow-up. He'd get 4 follow-up questions in there.
That's how he
Trichet
rolls.
would throw a brick at him at one point. Lagarde is busy this morning. There's some headlines. These are important for global Wall Street as well. The president of the ECB comments on Francine Lacqua's interview with the leaders of UniCredit. Quote, interesting to see Commerzbank UniCredit process to unfold. Boy, is that laden with the politics that Christine Lagarde has to manage. Also, Lagarde will know better where our star is as we get closer, which shows sometimes the foolishness of the guesstimates and forecasts on this. The way we guesstimate is the bond market, global rates, Paul, which I think is price up, yield down.
That's what they tell us here. Let's talk to a professional on this whole interest rate thing. That's Jamie Patton. She's co-head of global rates at TCW. Jamie, we had the ECB cut rates today as expected. Let's fast forward to next Wednesday with our U.S. Federal Reserve. What do you expect them to do on Wednesday and then maybe over the next several months?
On Wednesday, we think it's almost a done deal that they'll just go 25 basis points after the comments that they snuck in before their blackout period on Friday and the non-farm payroll report, CPI this week. The market has the chance of 50 basis points down to like 15 or 20%. That would be a surprise at this point. So we think they'll just go 25. And actually, in a weird way, we think that's good for the bond market over the long term because it puts the Fed even further behind the curve than we think they already are. And it's interesting. I heard you guys talking to Dominic Konstam on my drive in, and you were talking about
We're up to 42 listeners.
There you go.
Jamie, thank you so much. What format are you listening on, Jamie? Are you?
I was listening on Sirius.
Sirius, very good. Good morning to all of you,
car.
coast to coast on Sirius. Continue, please.
So, well, as an aside, as long as we're being casual here, I think it's another reason that it's important to have women on Wall Street because you guys were talking about hair charts. And I think if anyone knows about hair, it's the women. So just as an aside, Dominic does have great hair. But anyway, you were talking about these hair charts. And we have, for those that may have missed it or driving in a different time, a hair chart is a chart of Fed policy rates, for example, and then these little wisps coming off the chart that show what the market was expecting rates to be. So kind of like the forward curve at that time. So we have our own hair chart at TCW, which I would argue is better than other hair charts because we have so many women here. And what we do is we look at what on the eve of a Fed easing cycle, historically, what did the market price in? So coming back to your question, historically, actually since 2000, the market has done a pretty good job of estimating the first few cuts. So next week it's pretty baked in. But what it's done a terrible job of doing is estimating the total breadth of cuts. So since 2000, it's almost always underestimated cuts by a ton. And that's exactly what we think the market's doing again. So right now we have 100 basis points of cuts priced in for this year, another 150 for next year. We have Fed terminal rates. The trough of the curve is around 275, in line with the Fed's long-term dot. So that's come down a lot. But that's by 2026, mid-2026, we still have the trough of the Fed funds curve at 275, meaning the Fed can raise rates for over 500 basis points, keep it there for years and years, and then come back down on this nice, smooth, soft, steady landing back to neutral. They never get to anything beyond neutral.
Yep.
And that we think the market is doing exactly what they've done in the past and underestimating the breadth of Fed cuts that we're about to see.
So, I mean, do you think then that the Fed today is behind the curve and will continue to be behind the curve as they cut rates?
Yes.
Is that kind of how you guys are looking at it?
Yeah, we think they're already behind the curve. And look, they have a really tough job. They have to base their decisions on the data. And the data is hugely lagged and hugely flawed. Just take a survey, for example. The non-farm payroll data, which is something that they focus on maybe more than any other data. So it's survey-based. So you ask, 100 companies for the answer to their question. They give you data. And then you assume, since in the past there were 85 companies and then 95 companies and then 105 companies, you assume that the next round of data that you get, you assume there's 110 companies. When the economy turns, there's not 110 companies, there's 95 companies. And of course, I'm oversimplifying by a lot, but you can see not only is that data lagged in terms of like by the time an employer actually lets someone go, so many things have gone wrong, but it's also lagged in terms of just how the data is actually put together.
Mm-hmm.
Almost definitionally, you're going to miss that turn.
So that's kind of what a lot of folks have told us, Jamie, is that the Fed obviously looks, the data that it relies on is backward looking. If you look at real-time data, one could argue that the Fed should have been cutting, several quarters ago.
It's really in the zeitgeist.
Yep.
No question.
We totally agree. We have seen significant weakening year to date, especially since April. Right. The labor market's already weak. So yes, the Fed's basing their decisions on backwards-looking data, but that backwards-looking data is also super lagged. So they have many, many issues. I don't envy them. Their job is hard.
Jamie, I have one final question. This goes back to the TCW hair chart, looking at forward curves and Fed expectations. Can you explain to me why the Miss Dior essential hair oil, 1 ounce, is $75? Can you explain how that got into the Keene household?
Inflation.
1 ounce, $75.
Well, I think, as both an interest rate specialist and a hair specialist, I think I can help you with this. There's a difference between inflation and quality. You get what you pay for. I got my hair done this weekend. It was very expensive, but this is not free. I know it's radio. It's a shame. It should be TV so you can see my new hairstyle. Okay, yeah, check out YouTube and you can see, there's, it's a tough call, but there's a big difference between inflation and paying for quality.
Jamie, thank you. So actually, that's a hugely important conversation right now across America. Jamie Patton with TCW and Paul, I'm sorry, this is a serious conversation. It's polarization. Somebody had a chart out over the weekend. I'll give Sam Rowe credit with the Ferrari stock chart versus the Dollar General stock chart. Oh. Now that's, that's there, but there's a whole world out there of $75 1 ounce hair oil. They can't keep the stuff in.
I know.
And that we're talking about half of America flat on their back.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, boy, you look at Ferrari stock. I'm just looking at the ADRs. The U.S. ADRs up 40% year to date. $85 billion market cap for Ferrari. How about? And they make only a handful of cars every year that Matt Miller gets to drive around in. And Michael.
We got 12 seats in the Gulfstream, and I was talking to Farrell. We may just have to go. Azerbaijan is a little bit far this weekend for F1, but when F1 gets closer again, like Miami or Las Vegas or that, I mean, with Farrell leading our coverage and Adrian Newey taking over engineering at Aston Martin. I mean, all of a sudden,
I'll take your word for it.
I was over on Park Avenue yesterday, the Aston Martin store. There's people standing out front.
Yeah. I know.
Looking at the new Aston Martin with Adrian Newey there. It's very, very exciting, actually. As Jamie was telling us, we're on Sirius. Thank you for listening on Sirius, on Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, whichever way you commute. We are honored. When you get to the office, in your living room, YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts from New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. So more economic data for investors to consider today. U.S. producer prices rose slightly more than forecast in August. That was thanks to a rebound in the cost of services. PPI for final demand increased 0.2% from a month earlier after a downward revision to July's reading. And then weekly jobless claims rose 2,000 to 230,000 last week. So let's get to the reaction as we see what happens on a Thursday. Yes, Tom, it's Thursday. S&P 500 right now, little changed up a point at 5,555. The Dow, little change, down about 8 points, 40,852. The NASDAQ, little change, up 15 points at 17,409. We have the two-year yield, 3.65%, up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 3.66%, and that's up 1 basis point. Want to look at commodities? We have spot gold higher, $2,538 an ounce. Brent crude, $71 a barrel. WTI crude, $68 a barrel. At the open, I want to check in with Signet Jewelers, the owner of Zales, because it was moving the market before the bell up as much as 15%. Now it is open, it is up about 15%. It's the owner of Zales said engagement sales are actually up. More people getting married. That is your opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
At least, thanks so much. I want to look at the reality of this, and I think there's a really understanding across all of Bloomberg Surveillance about the success of selected American banking, others doing okay, and, you know, the struggles that are out there in banking. In Europe, it's been different. I met Francine Lacqua, Paul. She was 12 years old. And they said, we have this intern coming in 3 years early. She speaks 7 languages. Yep. And would you just have a cup of tea with her? They wouldn't let me have coffee with her. And so Francine Lacqua and I looked years ago at European banking, and it was a train wreck. It's still a train wreck. Deutsche Bank, 10 years trailing, -2, -3% per year performance. Deutsche Bank, 20 years trailing, -3% total return. Lagarde just spoke about it in Frankfurt. Here with us now, Francine Lacqua, with her important conversation with Mr. Orcel of UniCredit Italy and a potential mating with Commerzbank Germany. Francine, finally, are they going to act more American?
I mean, I think this is a dream of Andrea Orcel. Remember, he's ex-UBS. He was their star investment banker. He knows how to put a deal together. He's doing extremely well in terms of the cash they have. And he's always been wanting to create this cross-border consolidation, saying if you want to be a true bank for Europe, then you need to do this. The concern is regulators. The concern is labor unions. And of course, we don't have a banking union. You don't have a capital markets union. So this kind of shook up everyone when we found out that he had over 9% of Commerzbank, but I have to say the future is pretty uncertain. I would say, Tom, that he would really, really like to be more American, because every time over the last 10 years that I spoke to him, he kept on saying like, those, you know, the Wall Street knows how to do this, and he kind of wants to take them on.
I can't say enough. 20 years at Merrill Lynch, Paul, in London. This guy's the most American European banker. Francine told me that. We're at the Dorchester with an umbrella and our cocktails. Francine told me that years ago.
That's where you learn important stuff. Francine, what do we know from the regulators in the European Union about their willingness to think about this type of transaction?
So, look, for the moment, it's been extremely difficult. I would say it's practically impossible. It seems that this week there's more of a chance that this goes through. But again, you have to have the blessing of the board. I don't think Andrea Orcel, unless it's very, very appetizing in terms of price, would go hostile. I mean, he talked about it this morning. He spoke to us in the middle of trying to cobble together a possible takeover. He kept on telling me, look, there's an option of a full takeover, but for the moment, whatever happens, he'd be happy having a big chunk of this bank because he believes that the management is doing a good thing. But, you know, again, on the banking union, we had Mario Draghi with his competitive report this week saying even if you don't have a full banking union, you need to be able to transfer capital from one country to the other. And so at least they could agree on that for the big banks, and that would make a difference for a cross-border merger like this.
I mean, Francine, 20 minutes ago, Lagarde mentioned this transaction, possible transaction, in a comment of the ECB. do the institutions of Brussels and Frankfurt and Strasbourg, I think it is, I'm just trying to show her my map of Europe, is like really good. Do they want these transactions?
They haven't so far, but they may be able to going forward. Tom, it's complicated because you have countries such as Germany and others saying, look, you can't have a common issuance when it comes to bonds. So actually, we talk about a European market that's extremely fragmented. So if you're a big bank, but you can't put money from one, from A to B, then how does it mean for client transfers? Things are moving. Things are changing. We had new capital rules also from the Bank of England's PRA today. You have a new commission. So there needs to be political capital. I would say there's something quite odd with one of the people that's on the board of Commerzbank that's also a very, very big trade union laborer. He was saying, look, we'd rather the French come in than the Italians, because remember, UniCredit also bought this little bank called Hypovereinsbank, HVB, over 20 years ago and dismantled it. So sure, today it's profitable, but they lost a lot of jobs. And so there may be something in there that they want securities about how many jobs they have to kid. I'm not sure Andrea Orcel would like to do that.
Francine, off the radar, but you're so attached to this, I've got to ask, does Lagarde have the support after Sintra? Does Lagarde have further support at the ECB? Or is there a fractious debate behind the scenes that we don't see?
So look, for the moment, she does have support. Remember, she had this scathing review 4 or 5 months ago from economists in her group saying she didn't support the economists enough. She's a board politician. She's a board negotiator. But there wasn't, there's still quite a lot of dissent on the governing council, something that Mario Draghi, her successor, didn't, or her predecessor, didn't have, because he was good at listening to everyone and then saying there's only one boss, it's me, and you do as I say. She tries to find the nuance, and so sometimes people feel that they can go against what she thinks.
Francine, we didn't have you on for Orcel in your interview on UniCredit. Francine Lacqua, it's London Fashion Week. That's what matters. We know this.
Why am I not
Francine, the train wreck of United Kingdom fashion. I'm only bringing this up because John Tucker's Burberry is 42 years old. But how's the resurrection of Burberry going? This is a story you know.
All right, 4 p.m. on Monday, there's the catwalk. I'll be there to meet the new chief executive. Now, they actually found an American that comes from Coach, so it'll be very interesting what he sees as the future of Burberry. Is it going to go more mainstream? I mean, it's been difficult, and I wouldn't say it's difficult for all UK fashion, but it's certainly been extremely difficult for Burberry. I mean, they're even getting kicked out of the FTSE 100 in a couple of weeks, Tom. So this is a big deal, and we'll see if the former Coach CEO is able to turn this around.
I mean, Lisa Matteo's looking at the long quilted nylon trench coat in dollars, Francine, $2,400.
Nice.
It's almost like Burberry's underpricing themselves versus other UK and Milan fashion.
It depends on where you are in the price range. Did you see the story today, Tom, about the Row by the Olsen twins?
Yeah.
I mean, I think their trench coats are like $3,000, $4,000, and they have direct investments from the heirs to Chanel and the heirs to the L'Oreal family.
Right.
So it'll be interesting. It's only worth $1 billion. It's a small, but is the quiet luxury trend the one that we have to watch out in 5-10 years? I think that's probably the question for Burberry.
So this is great. I mean, one night, Paul, it's a small bar. It's got a Pabst Blue Ribbon sign blinking outside. It's called the Carlisle.
Yep.
I'm at the Carlisle with Mrs. Keene, and these two girls sit down next to us with 6 other people, and all of a sudden Mrs. Keene going, "Oh my God, it's the Row." And they were complete class acts. I can just report, I didn't talk to them, but I can just report that the Row, who are they, Francine? They're twins, right?
Yeah, they're the twins. The twins in the famous American TV series.
Yeah, total class acts. That's all there was to it.
Olsen twins? No.
The Olsen twins.
The Olsen twins.
Yeah, thank
you.
Mary Kate, and what's the other one? I don't know.
Ashley. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Francine
Lacqua. I'm here to talk regulation. I end up talking fashion. That's such a
That's what we like.
That's
how we go.
Surveillance London fashion queen, Francine Lacqua reporting. Look for her report Monday. Can you make a note, Ari, can we get Miss Lacqua back in Tuesday morning to report on the Burberry show? I'm serious. We got to do that. That's an iconic institution. John, you're about ready to get a new trench coat, aren't you?
Seriously, the one I have in my closet, I had in college. Swear to God.
And he is no spring chicken, ladies and gentlemen.
Hurricane Francine,
never
thank you for
washed,
joining
never
us.
taken to the cleaner once.
Oh, man.
You have no idea, folks, how we knew that was the case.
Yep.
Red and green on the screen. The VIX over 18.06. From New York City, there's no rain. John Tucker.
With my correspondent trench coat. History made this morning in the vacuum of space.
EV1, you are go for manual hatch open.
Billionaire Jared Isaacman and SpaceX engineer Sarah Gillis performing the world's first commercial spacewalk. A pair leaving the Crew Dragon craft in turn, with Isaacman going first. While outside of the Dragon, they conducted a number of motions to test out the mobility of those new spacesuits. The Polaris Dawn mission also made history when the SpaceX Dragon capsule reached a peak altitude of 870 miles above Earth, sending the crew farther than any humans have ever traveled since the Apollo program that, of course, sent astronauts to the moon. Donald Trump, Kamala Harris heading back on the campaign trail today, 2 days after their debate in Philadelphia. After a night that had the former president on the defensive, Trump raising doubts of whether he wants another one.
Are we going to do a rematch? I just don't know.
With Donald Trump telling reporters in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, that Harris wants another debate because she lost on Tuesday night. The vice president's donors and Snap polls say otherwise. Harris also hoping for a swift boost to her campaign. More than 300,000 people clicked on Taylor Swift's link to the government's voter registration website after she announced her Harris endorsement on Instagram. Francine moving inland across southeastern Louisiana after coming ashore as a Category 2 hurricane. And Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn says it is now to the north and west of New Orleans.
Heavy rain extends from the northern and northeastern side of the circulation. It'll continue to push in. The good news is the winds have diminished to 50 miles an hour. Big threat now will be isolated tornadoes over parts of Mississippi and northern Alabama today, and eventually western Tennessee, and also 3 to 5 inches of rain along the path of the system over the next 48 hours.
Bloomberg's Rob Carolyn. The Postal Service's new delivery vehicles aren't going to win any beauty contests. They're kind of ungainly. The hoods resemble a duckbill. The bumpers are very big. But the first handful of next-generation delivery vehicles getting rave reviews from letter carriers. Within a few years of the initial rollout, the fleet's going to expand to 60,000, most of them electric models. And a shout-out to Grumman, the old vehicles, because they lasted way, way beyond their expected life.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Grumman made those?
Grumman made
Wow.
those
Long
little
Island.
tiny ones with the steering wheels on the wrong side. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg.
Can I just say we're back to school, and there's little glimmers of hope here. Red and green on the screen, folks. Lagarde is done speaking. There's little glimmers. Afterthought, she's like at home watching Glee for the 14th time. Or Total Drama Island.
Why do I think she's going to be in therapy and
Yeah, Total Drama Island. She just sent me. I can't believe I'm seeing this. I'm going to tear up here. It's the methyl group trigonal pyramidal molecular structure from her biochemistry class.
Nice. There you go.
Little methyl ethyl ketone from Afterthought.
Wow.
There's hope after all.
Breaking it down.
I think she probably thinks it's a Bobo Mosa kind of thing,
She's taking organic chemistry?
She's taking biochemistry. It's her reach grade. We're going to reach to a C, which is better than I did. So, Good morning to all of you slaves through Leninger's biochemistry.
Take a gentleman's C.
Gentleman's C in Leninger's biochemistry. Yep. That's what we did.
Cocktail, you're just
Red and green on the screen. ECB cutting rates is expected, but some really interesting growth in inflation dynamics preparing us. And really, today's the first day. Thank you, Dr. El-Erian, for stopping by. Yep. Looking at the Fed and looking at where we'll be September 18th. The VIX 18.03. In the yield space, the Sweeney yield up 1 basis point, 3.66%. 10-year yield 3.67%. Some dollar, we had strength earlier, now it's flat. Dollar flatness right now. Yen 142.20. From New York City on YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Little movement in futures after another inflation reading came a bit higher than expected. U.S. jobless claims pick up for the first time in 3 weeks. The S&P 500 right now struggling to gain some traction after a 3-day rally. Right now it's down just a fraction. The Dow down about a tenth of a point, 55 points. The Nasdaq little changed, up about 13. To the 2-year yield, 3.65%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 3.66%. And that's up 1 basis point. To earnings we go. Kroger up 3%, lifted its full-year guidance. Consumers prioritize their spending on groceries, other essentials. You have Alaska Air up nearly 1%. It boosted its outlook for third quarter profits, strong summer demand, lower than expected fuel costs. And Delta up about 0.5%, expects full-year profit to be at or above the midpoint of its prior guidance despite the tech outage. After the close, we move on to Adobe. And finally, for shopping for a home, Realtor.com. They crunch the data. They say you might want to hold out until the week of September 29th through October 5th, where you could save as much as $14,000. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciated. Yeoman's duty at the debate. David Gura got like 3 hours sleep. He was, by the time he got to us the morning after the debate, Paul, he was completely charred.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know,
sure. I mean, it's a lot of cheesesteaks.
It's a lot of cheesesteaks, and you know, it's amazing. You know, you hole up at the Ritz there in Philadelphia. So he had nothing else to do. So driving north out of New Jersey. Gura, you know, he doesn't fly. He won't go in a helicopter.
No? Okay.
So he's in a limo.
Yep.
And he's going, okay, pharmaceuticals in New Jersey, let's do this. And he's in Raritan.
Nice.
Raritan. He gets off the Parkway.
Yep.
I couldn't tell you where. Do you know where that is?
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's next to the Raritan River, which tends to flood all the time.
Yeah, so in Raritan, there is, of all pharmaceuticals, Johnson & Johnson. Mr. Gura doing a wonderful effort here with their chief financial officer. It is Seth Malgalaner's chief future officer project stimulating. What's your angle on J&J?
Fascinating company that went through this big split last year. So a lot of us are familiar with the consumer-facing side of that business. They decided to spin that off. That's now called Kenvue, and the rest is focused now on med tech and pharmaceuticals. So I spent a lot of time, as you say, with the chief financial officer. That's Joe Walk. And with his boss, the CEO as well, Joaquin Duato. And what's fascinating about this company is, yes, it's publicly traded and quite old, but it still has the feel of a family company. Both of those men have spent almost their entire careers at that company. They know each other very well as a result of that. And so what Seth does really beautifully in these pieces, as you know, Tom, you did one, the Red Sox, is gets a sense both of the place, the culture of the company, and what that relationship is like between the CEO and the CFO. And I got a real taste of that during my time out there in Raritan.
Everybody out there wants every company to split up. What did they say was the biggest surprise in the exercise? Because, Paul, this is not like Warner Brothers Discovery. I don't have 80% debt. I got 10%, 11% debt on one side, and I got 14% whatever on the other side. These are adult companies. What was the biggest challenge?
Adult companies, they were surprised at how fast they were able to pull this off. So they announced this in 2021. The CFO there had not worked on a deal like this before and just talked about how difficult it was just to get into a room and learn, figure out how to do this and deal with all the challenges that you're describing. But this came on the heels of COVID, of course. J&J had a COVID-19 immunization that it developed, and it recognized the fact that the pharmaceutical landscape is changing. You look at the patent cliff, which has gotten steeper and steeper. This is the point at which a drug that a company's developed can go off a patent and generics can come in. They worry about that. And then they see opportunity here with AI for drug development. So we talked a lot about that. And that's what they're really embracing here, is how the speed of development is going to increase and how they invest in that.
Paul, 134,000 people out of New Brunswick. This is J&J, now Kenvue. In the 10-year and 20-year total return per year, it's just not good enough.
No.
It's single digit, mid-single digit. There's nothing blue chippy about this.
No, and I think interesting when they split the companies apart, you go back to the original J&J, billions of R&D is required every year, number one. Number two, you have to be really good using your cash on strategic M&A to find the next big thing. That means to me that this CFO is more than just a CFO. He's kind of again, a strategic. I used to call them strategic CFOs as opposed to just debits and credits guys.
And we talked a lot about that. I mean, particularly in this environment where rates are higher than they were, how they target companies and go through these deals. And they've made a few. They've bought, they spent several billion on new pharmaceuticals over these last many years. But the genius of the show, as Seth has devised it, is that the role of the CFO has changed. And I heard that from the CEO of this company as well. He relies on the CFO for much more than just looking at the balance sheet and looking at the numbers. They have this kind of strategic mind meld. And it's interesting if you look at what CFOs have done after that job. Many more of them are now being elevated to CEOs. And so that's not happening at Johnson & Johnson. Perhaps it could. There's some rumor that it might, but he's playing a much bigger role in the C-suite than he might have in the past.
You see, they send an adult to J&J, David Gura. They send me to Fenway Park, where the biggest strategic decision is what are we going to do about shortstop?
Exactly.
It's a little different.
It's interesting. I mean, I'm looking at the shareholders. The Johnson family, that foundation, those shares are still with J&J. They're not with Kenvue at all. That's interesting.
That's right. It's a more sizable company, and we talked a lot about kind of the political environment in which this happened as well. And so the Biden administration passed this Inflation Reduction Act, and what that's going to do is kind of have to renegotiate a lot of prices through Medicare for what Medicare is paying for drugs. And J&J, 3 of them are doing that. So there's a lot more transit that the CFO is doing now to Washington, having to deal with those renegotiations too.
David Gura, look for this, folks. The Big Take podcast, of course, is what he's grinding out every day. Johnson & Johnson, in conversation with their chief financial officer, chief future officer, Bloomberg Television. Look for that. It gets huge replay and all that.
Can I do my shameless plug?
Please.
On YouTube and Bloomberg.com.
Oh, very
right now,
good.
available.
Oh, okay, perfect. That's good. Nobody cares. Is there going to be a second debate?
I'm going to be watching that conversation very closely over this next week. So just to catch everybody up,
They don't have time for a week. They
days to come here.
Days.
The former president disinclined to do another one. The current vice president very eager to have another opportunity to be on stage with Donald Trump. So we'll see if that gets hammered out. And I will say, I don't know if I said this on your show yesterday, but I talked to the head of the RNC right after that debate. He's very enthusiastic about the prospect of there being another one as well. So there is this kind of divide that we've seen over and over again now between candidate Trump and the party that he has gotten a firmer grip on.
Let's drive forward your observation. I think it was his 400th appearance on Bloomberg TV and radio in Philadelphia. You warbled something about Arizona. How does immigration and migration play south of Green Valley, Arizona?
I think I think Arizona is going to be the state to watch, and you see former President Trump going there this week. He's going to hold a big rally there, and Vice President Harris and her team are sending folks there as well. Look, it's going to be...
Is it the Latino vote?
It's the Latino vote, a central issue here. And then I think as we saw during the course of that debate, immigration is what the former president wants to talk about over and over again. Is he talking about policy? Well, as we saw in the debate, no. He's talking about any manner of conspiracy theories and other things. But they see this as a winning issue. I think they're still optimistic that they're going to be able to convince people that Vice President Harris's remit when it comes to immigration is bigger than, in fact, it was.
Right.
They think this is going to be the wedge issue that's going to help them out here as they push forward.
David Gura, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate that. Again, yeoman's duty of the debate as well. And, of course, Chief Future Officer, an important look at an American icon, Johnson & Johnson. Gura driving the market lower. You see how he did that?
Of course, yeah.
Down negative 118.
Bring on the real news guy.
-8.
What happens?
Yeah, 18.35 on the VIX. I think it's like a churn. We got through PPI and inflation.
Yep.
When's Michigan? Tomorrow? Today? I can't.
I don't know.
David, I was a real pro today. I came in. I didn't realize it was Thursday.
It is. Yeah.
Well,
Well,
I nailed that.
Time flies.
Tomorrow, Michigan and import price statistics as well. That'll be important. The 10 o'clock hour, the Alex Steele hour, we call that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So next week, retail sales, not a small item.
No, I mean, you got to get a sense how the consumer's doing out there, Tom. And as I think we've heard from a lot of companies, there's a sizable portion of the population out there that's really hurting, feeling the continued effects of inflation here, Tom. We heard it from the dollar stores. We heard it a little bit from the Walmarts of the world. So we'll hear what we see on the retail sales. Yet, the luxury continues to roll on.
Major shout out to Dominic Konstam. We thank him for his support this morning. An extended conversation with a gentleman from Mizuho. I thought he was absolutely riveting about the limited choice set these central banks have with the uncertainty off of the pandemic. The Dow, negative 140. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney, they carry it forward next. Good morning.